ahead and call this meeting of the Parks, Recreation, and Arts Commission to order. City Clerk, would you please conduct a roll call vote, please? Roll call, not a roll call vote.
Commissioner Soto.
Present.
Commissioner Dolan. Absent. Commissioner Kucharski.
Present.
Commissioner Collier. Commissioner Barraza. Commissioner Singh. Absent. Commissioner Miller.
Here.
Vice Chair Ward.
Present.
Chair McCoy.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. We will now begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Will everyone please stand? Ready, salute.
United States of America,
And to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We will start with the approval of the agenda. City Clerk, are there any changes or proposed changes to the agenda?
There are no changes.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
I make the motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. This item is approved. We will now move on to approval of minutes. Are there any changes to the minutes from August 16th, 2024?
There are no changes.
It said that the Cultural Arts Committee has been disbanded, and I don't know that we got a chance to decide whether that should be the case or not. Miss Chavez.
But that doesn't have anything to do with the approval of the minutes. So as we get into our workshops, we're going to discuss our roles and our responsibilities when it comes to that part. So it's on the agenda.
But the decision to get rid of the committee was in direct opposition to the recommendation to continue with the culture.
So once their business was done, their work was done, then each subcommittee, not just the Arts Culture Plan, each subcommittee will disband until it's time for us to come back together to work on that part of the bucket when it comes to Measure P. So when it's time again for the grants to be accepted, then the subcommittee will reconvene, and it may be new members, it may not be the old members, it just depends on who I appoint onto that subcommittee.
Okay.
So that doesn't have anything to do with the approval of the minutes. We're just approving the minutes from last meeting.
Okay, I just thought that it was, that getting rid of the subcommittees, it didn't seem like we had an input in it, but that was, I guess, expected, and that's part of the minutes. That's what I was raising the question for. But I get you. Okay.
Okay.
Motion
Thank
to
you.
approve.
Thank you, Vice Chair.
Former
So-
Vice Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Dolan. Is there a second to approve the minutes?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Barraza. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no.
Abstain. Ms. Collier abstains.
Okay. Did you get that, City Clerk? Okay. We will now move on to subcommittee reports. This item is a discussion item for the commission, and no public comments will be taken related to the item. The Cultural Arts Plan Subcommittee completed their task once the Cultural Arts Plan and grant guidelines were adopted by City Council and the Cultural Arts funds were awarded, so the subcommittee has automatically dissolved. Does the Parks Master Plan Subcommittee have an update it would like to provide to the Commission?
I don't have anything, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Does the Highest Needs Neighborhood Subcommittee have an update it would like to provide to the Commission? So we will be having a workshop from WRT to discuss the highest needs. We'll be reviewing the mapping and seeing the results of the surveys tonight. Does the San Joaquin River Parkway Subcommittee have an update it would like to provide to the commission?
Yeah, sure. The subcommittee's going to have a meeting on October 17th at 9 a.m. with two of the other commissioners here. Everyone on the commission's invited. If you'd like to go, you RSVP to Sarah with the city. And for those of you who aren't familiar, we're going to be touring the parkway, the San Joaquin River Parkway. We're going to be meeting with the San Joaquin River Conservancy and the San Joaquin Parkway, the trust as well, which is a nonprofit. And the area covers Friant Dam all the way to Highway 99 along the San Joaquin River on both sides, Fresno County and Madera County. So we'll be looking at a few of the properties. It's very large. We can't do everything in a couple hours, but they've highlighted the areas they'd like the commissioners to see.
May I ask you something? Where will we be meeting at 9, or do we just find our way out to the Coke Holloway house?
That's a good question. I believe we'll send out details on the meeting spot as we get a little closer.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you. As a reminder, ad hoc committees are for a limited term and are charged with accomplishing a specific task. Such committees must dissolve when its task is completed. Ad hoc committees are not meant to be for perpetual. So now we will move on to member reports and comments. As a reminder, this is a time for commission members to report anything they feel important for the public or commission to know, but it's not a time for discussion. Commissioner Barraza, do you have any reports or comments?
Madam Chair, I missed something under subcommittee, if I may, just to update you. I understand a final draft report is coming to this commission the month of October, and then it'll go to the council for final approval. My apologies, I wasn't up to date on what was going on with that. Thank you. And Madam Chair, I don't have anything else.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Singh,
No reports at this time.
Commissioner Miller, Vice Chair Ward.
Yes, on the 18th, I was able to attend the groundbreaking for Broadway Parquet and South Tower. It was a really nice event. I wanted to commend the advocacy of Kyle Lopez-Schmidt, as well as the work of Director Geary and his team, and also Councilman Arias for incorporating the community-led design aspects of that park. It will certainly be a true asset for that community once it's built.
Thank you. Commissioner Collier, do you have any reports or comments?
Not at this time.
Thank you. Commissioner Kurcharski,
Not at this time. Thank you.
Commissioner Dolan,
Nothing at this time.
Commissioner Soto.
Nothing at this time, thank you.
Thank you. We will now move on to City Administration and PRAC staff reports and comments. Does anyone from the administration have any reports or comments for the commission?
Not at this time, thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone from PRAC staff have any reports or comments for the commission?
Chair McCoy, thank you. Just wanted to highlight again, I know last meeting you all were given these flyers for the upcoming workshops in Southwest Fresno. So this is the West Fresno Community Center Open House Series that we talked about. This is really the community's vision for these 4 centers. Just want to, again, invite you all to the 4 activities. Starting Tuesday, October 5th from 5 to 8 p.m. Dinner will be provided at Sunset Community Center. This is, again, to view the concepts and the information we heard from the community on how they'd like that facility to look. Following night, Mariella Brown, October 9th, 5 to 8, again, dinner will be provided. So we encourage you all to attend. And then Frank H. Ball will be Wednesday, October 30th, again, 5 to 8, dinner provided. Then finally, Maxial Parks. This will actually be on Halloween, Thursday, October 31st from 3 to 9. This one will be a little different. It'll be a street fair. We'll work with some of our stakeholder groups and again, to see what the community wanted to see at that center there. So again, invite you all to attend. The information is on our website and hope to see you all there. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now move on to unscheduled communication. Would any member of the public like to speak on any issue within the jurisdiction of this commission? You will have up to 3 minutes. If you would like to make any comments regarding workshops or discussion items, now is the time to do so. If you would like to make a comment regarding any of the scheduled hearings, comments will be taken when each item is called. I do have a card from Melanie De La Garza Cruz.
Not at this moment. I don't have a question.
Okay, thank you. Do we have anyone online?
Yes, we have Gabriel Lozano. Gabriel, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Okay, we can hear you now.
Okay. I'm not sure if I can speak on these items, but I wanted to speak on the annual plan, and I wanted to speak on the highest needs neighborhoods, and then I wanted to have a report on Pillables Park. What can I speak on for my 3 minutes here?
This is unscheduled communication. You can speak on anything you want.
Okay, for the parks plan, the last one I seen online was 22. I was wondering if we can get that updated, if we can at least get 23, hopefully 24, and we can do a comparative for all 3 years. The other thing, the highest needs neighborhoods, I would like to use the data and the criteria to choose these neighborhoods because a lot of the programming and improvement in safety are for existing parks. And though I've seen some parks going southeast, the programming and existence, physical, bringing parks to southeast is not there yet. So that would dictate to me the environmental risk factors are there, but it doesn't seem that we're the fastest growing area. We're not getting enough parks cited that way. The other thing I'd like to know is that my family visited Pillables Park, and it's full of people that are unhoused, people that are doing drugs, dangerous, having sex acts there, and it's just not a good place to take our kids there. The fields are bad again and stuff like that. And I wanted to know where are the park rangers at? I really don't see them. I frequent that park and I pick up trash all the time, and I'm not there. I don't see people there. It's really hard to use these parks. And as I look at what Measure P is about, I see the criteria, what I've asked criteria, I haven't seen a lot of that met. And I'd like to see where, by census tract and by zip code, where the money's going, not only for programming, but for projects and that type of information. Where, and I wondering if we in the annual plan can get it done for 22, 23, 24, but as the comparative to see where we're making our improvements. Because if you're not, and I'm just speaking, maybe I'm missing something, so forgive me if this is wrong. But if I don't see anything there, then that means that should jump to the top of the line in my thoughts, because there's no progress there. And I volunteered 100 hours to get Measure P, volunteered to get it passed, and did a lot of networking, making calls and so forth. And I just don't see that happening in Southeast Fresno. If you don't have physical parks and rec centers there, how can you have programming? We're missing a lot of areas. It's kind of like the body, where we have a vascular veins going everywhere. The body misses, there's areas that aren't covered, and that's kind of what's happening with Southeast Fresno. I still see the need there for the highest needs neighborhood criteria, which is existing conditions of parks.
There are no more speakers online.
Thank you. I'm going to go back out to the forum and ask, is there anyone who would like to make any comments on the workshops that we have scheduled tonight? Because I will not open public comment on the workshops once they're presented. So it's your turn, it's your time to make comments now.
Can I give this out to somebody here? I'm a little bit lost at this entire agenda.
Thank you.
What the process is. Anyway, Jose Luis Barraza. I'm a resident in the city of Fresno, a longtime resident, and a cultural arts worker. Currently, I am the program manager for Southeast Fresno Community Economic Development Association. We, the residents and businesses of Southeast Fresno, are concerned in the first round of Measure P funding. Only 3% of the funding went to art groups in this community in Southeast Fresno. And ironically, our community demonstrated our desire of these funds for art programs and culture in this community, as indicated in the Measure P Arts Needs Assessment, which indicates that the majority of responses came from the residents from 93702. We know this because it's written in the document, and as well as we were the outreach workers in making that happen. We worked very hard to get feedback. And it may be included in this packet you got. I don't know, but I'm going to provide it anyway because it may be a little bit different. We propose an adequate amount of funds be set aside in the current budget and be used by the Fresno Arts Council for outreach and technical assistance programs for artistic individuals and groups interested in developing a nonprofit status and training these individuals or groups to participate in the competitive process of Measure P funding. Should Fresno Arts Council demonstrate that they are not allocated sufficient funds for such a proposal, then we request that the Measure P Commission allocate those necessary funds to the Fresno Arts Council in order to carry out a proposed recommendation. And I say this very, very candidly. The arts in Fresno has never had the support of the city of Fresno or the various funds and streams that existed within various public funds. And for that reason, many groups and individuals depended much on the Parks and Recreation and the educational system in order to put on their programs. And for that reason is perhaps why, even though we are known for Southeast Fresno having some tremendous artists, and they have been before you, including myself, and have spoken to you in regards to their expertise. Given the chance, we will put together the programs that are necessary for Southeast Fresno if given the opportunity. With that, I thank you for your time.
Thank you. We will now move on to workshops. ID number 24-1316, workshop highest need definition from WRT, presentation of the highest needs percentiles and maps. We will hold off on questions until the workshop is completed, and then I will come back to the commissioners and ask them if they have any questions regarding the presentation. Sarah, you can go ahead and start.
Thank you. Good evening, Commissioners. Sarah Gaitan, Program Manager for the Parks Department. Today, we have the highest needs neighborhood definition presentation, and we have consultant WRT on the line to kick us off for this.
All right. Can you hear me, Commission?
Yes.
Excellent. Very good. Very good to be here with you this evening to take the next step in defining highest need neighborhoods for this second period, 2025 to 2027. This is progress. We are moving forward in the implementation of Measure P now into the second phase, and this is happening exactly as it should, and the public process continues. So this is a part of that, and I'm going to walk through, if you go to the next slide. Today, we will just reacquaint ourselves with highest need neighborhoods. What does that mean in the context of Measure P? Then we will update this group, the public and the commission, on mapping each of the equity factors associated with Measure P. We've remapped them, sometimes with some, just as there has been updated data available, we've been able to map the equity factors again. Then we will report back on the community engagement that has been done on evaluating how important each of those equity factors is to the community. And we'll be able to report back both on the outreach that was conducted and on the response that we got from community members. And then finally, we will show how all of those mapped equity factors, as they have been proposed to be weighted or presented in terms of their relative importance by the community, what does that mean in terms of potential definition of highest need neighborhoods for this next phase? So starting with Measure P and highest need neighborhoods, maybe, there we go. There we go. Just to reacquaint us all again with the language in the ordinance, the city, in conjunction with the commission, shall adopt a new definition of highest need neighborhoods no later than January 1st, 2022. So that was done. That has been done already. After conducting a public process, to be updated every 3 years. That's where we are now, and included in subsequent updates to the plan. The city and commission shall create a weighted index incorporating the following data in developing the definition. And then the ordinance defines each of these, what we're calling equity factors. And we'll walk through these as we introduce the maps that are associated with each of these equity factors. But I think to start with, just at a higher level, the purpose of these equity factors is to recognize that not all parts of the community have had equal access to recreation, and not all parts of the community have equal need for recreation. And that's why it's important to think in terms of equity, and that's why it's important that the ordinance has equity built into it. So the way that it has equity built into it, and I think there may have been a slide there, but I realize it's not here, but I want to say it, is that 50% of all of the funds that Measure P distributes in the areas of new parks and existing parks should be in highest need neighborhoods. That's the mechanism that the ordinance brings in to ensure that there's good investment in the neighborhoods that need investment most. So now I will hand it off to my colleague, Hannah, and we'll walk through the updated mapping of each of the equity factors.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Peter. This is Hannah. I'm so happy to be here. I'll just walk through briefly each of the maps that represent each of the equity factors and talk about a little bit about each one. We can always come back if there are further questions. So starting with A, equity factor A, existing conditions of parks and facilities based on the needs assessment data in the master plan. This map in red represents areas where there is at least one park in poor condition, and that is what is included in the highest needs neighborhoods definition. Next, we have equity factor B, the proportion of the population that lives within walking distance, a half mile to a park. For this map, for this equity factor, census tracts where less than 48% of people live within a half mile walking distance to a park are included in the highest needs neighborhoods definition. Next, we have equity factor C, park acreage per 1,000 residents. So this is how much park acreage is there in the city of Fresno relative to the number of people. And here, census tracts where there are less than 1.6 acres per 1,000 people, so that's the red and the orange and the yellow, are included in the highest needs definition. Here we have population density. Here, census tracts with a population density of more than 5,607 people per square mile, so that includes the red and the orange, are included in the definition. Here we have two maps that represent equity factor E, which is neighborhood youth and senior population. Starting with youth population, Here, census tracts where the percent of the population of residents under 18 years of age is greater than 26% is included in the definition. So that's orange and red areas. The second map for equity factor E relates to seniors. So that's areas where seniors are living, and census tract where the percent of the population of residents over 65 is greater than 14%, which is yellow, orange, and red areas on this map, is included in the definition. Next, we have equity factor F, neighborhood safety. This map represents crimes per 1,000 residents over the course of a year, and census tracts where the number of reported crimes is greater than 79 per 1,000 people is included in the definition. So that's red, orange, and yellow areas. Next, we have equity factor G, neighborhoods of concentrated poverty. This map, we use Cal-Enviroscreen, which calculates a poverty percentile. And the areas in red and orange represent census tracts where the poverty percentile is greater than 72%, and that is what is included in the definition. Here we have equity factor H, pollution burden. Here we also use Cal-Enviroscreen, and Cal-Enviroscreen calculates a pollution burden percentile. And wherever it is greater than 68%, which is red and orange on this map, it has been included in the definition for highest needs. I is preterm birth rates. Here we show where the top 25% of Fresno County census tracts have, is a rate of high preterm births. And this is taken from the Fresno County Department of Public Health, and the red areas are included in the definition. J is years of potential life lost. Here you can see areas identified as being in the highest percentile, and red are included in the definition. And here we have equity factor K, which is composite mortality rate. And it's based on a group of a few maps. So we'll start with this one, which is about cancer, highest percentile for cancer. The next one shows asthma. Here we have the highest percentile for adult asthma. The next one is diabetes. Here we see highest percentile for diabetes. And lastly, we see the highest percentile for coronary heart disease. So equity factor K is any of those red areas combined are included in the definition. And that concludes the updated mapping. And also we'll move on to some updates about the survey that was shared and the outreach that went with it.
So in partnership with the Highest Needs Subcommittee and WRT, a survey was created to assist in identifying a priority level for each of the equity factors that were just mentioned, outlined in Measure P ordinance. The 11 equity factors mentioned in the ordinance were given a ranking, and the ranking options were less important, somewhat important, important, more important, or most important. This helped us identify what was most important to our community members. And that is an example of the equity factors and how they were written out. To collect survey responses, the Parks Department engaged with community members in person and through electronic and digital channels. This included 13 community events. There were over 65,000 emails sent out, resulting in over 25,000 of those emails to be opened. There were 10 social media posts and 20 stories reaching over 8,000 impressions. The survey was promoted at all Parks community centers. There was collaboration with other City of Fresno departments and PRAC partners. And it was also featured in 2 local news reports. The outreach period was July 24th through August 21st, and that was a total of 29 days. Oops. During those 29 days, 1,427 surveys responses were collected. Here you can see the survey results versus the census percentages for each of the topics. You can see the top 15 zip codes that responded to the survey and the breakdown of gender and a breakdown of age groups who also participated in the survey. You can see in age, we were overall pretty well represented. The survey was available online through our website, and traffic was directed there from the emails and our printed marketing materials. It was available through tablets that we had available at events that we attended, and we had paper copies available as well at our events and community centers. So here you can see a breakdown of the race and ethnicity versus the census percentage. We had 97.97% of the responses were in an English survey, 0.07 in Hmong. We didn't have any Punjabi, and we had 2.02% in Spanish. Overall, we had 91.73 that took the survey online, almost 5% that completed it at an event through our tablets, and we had 3.29% that turned in a paper copy. And I will send it back to WRT.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, so tremendous response, really. 1,427 is the number I'm keeping in my head here. And the survey, as Sarah said, gave everyone an opportunity to tell us whether they thought, in the case of each of the 11 equity factors, whether they thought that factor was less important, somewhat important, important, more important, or most important. So there's 5 categories there. And we used the median, which is the midpoint. The midpoint response was used to determine the overall weighting that that equity factor should get. We'll talk a little bit about that on the next slides, where you can sort of see how that works out. This slide is representing the response that we got, those 1,427 survey responses for each equity factor A through K. The top portion of each column, which has the darkest tone, represents the percentage of responses for each of those equity factor columns where people felt that that equity factor was most important. Then the next tone down, the medium gray, is more important. The lighter gray is important. The lighter still gray is somewhat important. And then the lightest gray of all at the bottom of the column, those are the percentage of responses that were where people said that factor was less important. And the way I'm going to try to visualize the idea of the median here is that if each of these surveys was actually handed in as a piece of paper, and with equity factor A, the papers, the survey responses that you put at the bottom of that stack would be the ones where people said that was less important. Then you'd add the surveys where people said that was somewhat important. Then you'd add more surveys to the top of that stack, which would be the important. And then again, add the surveys where people responded those were more important, and finally most important. So you'd have a tall stack of paper. And imagine that column is a tall stack of paper. Each paper is a survey. The midpoint in that survey is the point where we're going to say that's where the community that's where the sort of typical response lands. And so that dashed line that you see going across the center of this chart is indicating where the median response would land in each of these stacks of surveys associated with equity factor A, B, C, D, and so on. And so we can see with the dark orange outline the typical response in each category. So wherever that line falls would be, let's say, the typical response. And so if you go to the next page, the next slide, we can see that most of the equity factors fall into the category of more important. And we're assigning the more important category in terms of understanding how to weight each of these, we're going to give that 2 times the average amount of weight. So for equities factors A, B, D, E, F, G, J, and K, community members felt each of those factors were more important than the average, let's say. There were 3 equity factors where the median response fell into the important category, which is like average. And so those were equity factors C, H, and I. The next step is to pull all of those equity factors together. And as Hannah was walking through, as you recall, she would say, in this equity factor, highest need was determined to be such and such. And so in each case, a certain set of census tracts were included in the potential highest need definition. And those were based on census tracts typically where in that category, that neighborhood had let's say, a higher percentage of the factor characteristic. So what we're trying to do here is we're pulling all of those factors together into one composite map. And then we're also giving greater weight to the equity factors that the community members, that 1,427 members of this community felt were more important. We're going to give more weight to those equity factors. So those get more points as we try to create a composite map. There's a lot of mapping in here. Underneath what looks like this very simple map, there's a lot of work, a lot of sort of wheels were turning. So what you're seeing right here on this map is actually, when we step back, this is the current definition. This is as it was defined in 2022, when we approved this and it became effective in January of 2022. This commission made a recommendation to council, and council adopted a definition of highest need neighborhoods, which included the top 33% of census tracts in Fresno. This is the current definition. And then what you see in that list on this slide is the 23 parks and facilities that fall within those neighborhoods. Now, we have actually expanded the list of parks and facilities, partly because there's some new facilities that have come online, and partly because maybe there were some that weren't really accounted for in the previous version. But we're making sure to account for the entire universe of parks and spaces that are managed by the Parks Department. So if we look at, and so just as we did last time, we're going to show you options, potential ways of defining highest need neighborhoods based on the threshold percentage of the total neighborhoods in Fresno. So we're going to show you 10%, 25%, 33%, and 50%. Each of these are ways to sort of increasing the amount of neighborhoods that fall within the definition up to 50% of all City of Fresno neighborhoods. So we start with the top 10%, and these would be the neighborhoods whose scores are in the top 10% of all of the census tracts. And you can see that those are kind of distributed around central Fresno, and they include a relatively small number of Fresno's parks. And noticeably, several of these are almost not even parks so much as small spaces. Merced, several linear spaces along Merced, for example. If you expand it to the next set, okay, so this slide is just highlighting the parks out of the total 110 parks in Fresno. The ones that are highlighted are the ones that would fall within the top 10% highest need neighborhoods. Another option would be to say the top 25% should be the threshold that we use for highest need neighborhoods. And here you see in orange those neighborhoods that fall within the top 25%. And listed on this slide, all of the parks that are in red, those would have been already included in the 10% definition. Now we're bringing in a whole bunch of new parks that are in these additional neighborhoods that are being captured. So you can see all of those listed in orange. And then on the next slide, you can see all of those highlighted parks would be parks that would be accounted for in this definition of highest need neighborhood.
And Peter, I just want to hop in and say that on this slide, in the top 25%, all of the parks that are currently in the highest needs neighborhoods would fall in this top 25% because the mapping and data has shifted slightly. So just that the current definition is the top 33%, and all of those parks that are currently in the top 33% would fall in the top 25% here. You'll find all of those parks on this list and more.
Great, thank you, Hannah, that's helpful. So then the next step up would be to stick with the current definition in terms of percentile, which is 33%. Which is basically saying 1/3 of the neighborhoods in Fresno should be considered highest needs. It's actually a little bit different than that because a lot of census tracts received the same overall composite score. So as long as the first park on that list is captured, then everything that received that same score is also included. And so it ends up being more than 33%. That's why this map is actually looking, as you can see, it looks like a greater percentage than 33% of the neighborhoods, but it is the neighborhoods that meet that criteria of being in the top 33% percentile. And in this case, the new parks that would be added from 25% to 33% are those parks that are listed in yellow. So not so many, not such a big change. And you can see all of the parks that would be listed, that would be included in the top 33% definition. And then finally, if we were to use top 50% threshold, you can see the additional neighborhoods that would be added, and then the additional park sites are the ones that are listed in this table in green. So here we can see all of those together. You can see each of the thresholds together to see how they kind of grow on one map. So the red census tracts are those that would be included if the definition was top 10%. Then when you add the dark orange, the red and the dark orange would be included in the top 25%. Then if you add the light orange, those three categories would be included if the definition were top 33%. And then finally, if you add the pale green, all of those colors would be included if we were to set the definition at the top 50%. And you can see geographically that in general, central Fresno is home to the highest need neighborhoods. There are simply different ways of defining the tightness of that definition. So the next step is for us to consider tonight and for the public to consider in the next stage of outreach, what percentage of census tracts should be considered highest need neighborhoods? Should it be the top 50%, the top 33%, the top 25%, the top 10%? And if you think that we need to entertain something else, we could consider that as well. But these are the categories that we felt made sense and are consistent with the last categories we tested in the first phase. So we're initiating that, and I think I'll hand it back to Sarah, I think, to talk about the next stage of outreach.
Thank you, Peter. For phase 2 of outreach, we have commenced it today by bringing this presentation to PRAC and opening up phase 2 of outreach to gather input about which percentile threshold to recommend. We will be following suit with, along with like the first phase, we will be including email blasts, social media campaigns, leveraging community events, using our community centers and staff, and directing traffic to our website. On October 28th, we will meet here again to present the phase 2 outcomes and finalize the PRAC recommendation to council. The final step will be to present to council for adoption before January 1st, 2025. This concludes our presentation, and we will open up the floor for questions or any comments.
Thank you. just really one quick question before I go to the commissioner. So we will not be deciding which percentage to use tonight. We will be doing that October 28th.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you. Does any member of the commission have any questions or comments regarding this item?
I was just going to say, how does this stack up with prior years of taking care of parks? What percentage was it at the highest need prior to this most recent research?
Commissioner Collier, are you asking about the last definition that was adopted by council in 2021 that went into effect 2022?
Well, that and what percentages of the highest need neighborhood did they actually take care of in earlier years? Was it 50%? Was it 33%? Was it 25%?
So
what has it been in the past?
So prior to Measure P, there was not a map like this done. There were not equity factors that were taken into consideration. 2021, this commission was the first commission to really produce this document in the high needs neighborhood as part of Measure P. So that 2021 was the first high needs definition. This will be the second. So prior to that, I wasn't here, but that document did not exist. I can't speak to how they budgeted before.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Dolan, you have the floor.
Yeah, just want to commend both the city staff and the consultants, WRT, for this work. It was actually a lot that was developed. There was a lot of conversation that went on around there. And I know they were very diligent about going out and getting that public input, which is not as easy as one would hope often. And we're very responsive to the idea that we needed to target a lot of that input from the areas that we thought were being underrepresented in sort of a mass emailing. So just wanted to say that that was really good work.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Barraza?
I'm sorry, Madam Chair. I'll go after.
Commissioner Singh?
Yes.
I had a couple of questions in regards to the equity factors. When I know that this was actually brought up the last time we talked about the highest needs definition, but when we're talking about being half a mile away from a park, does that mean like that walk is on a sidewalk, or yes?
It is considered a walkable half a mile.
Okay,
Yes.
so walkable half a mile. And then my second question is, so what does it mean? So when we go to equity factor A for the existing condition of parks and facilities, what does it mean for a park to be in poor condition? For example, like JSK Park recently got a new tot lot. I think it got new grass fields, and it's hopefully getting a cricket field in the near future. Does that mean that it's now not considered in poor condition, or even though we know that there's still like other improvements that can be made? That's my question.
Okay. We're gonna go ahead and turn this over to WRT so they can speak on the assessments.
Anna, do you want to take this, or shall I?
I can jump in. So the park assessment used for this round of updates was recently completed by WRT with some assistance on the ground from the city, and I will have to go back to review the exact condition reported from that park, but the update is very recent, building off the work that was done for the assessment in the Parks Master Plan. So we started with the Parks Master Plan assessment as our base, and we took the process that was done for that assessment in 2017 and 2018 and updated it for this current definition in 2024.
And I think to speak specifically to the question about, tot lots that were years old, and in need of repair or replacement, JSK did get a new tot lot, and it did get safety surfacing. So that reset that from a poor or fair condition to a, what was the top category there, Sarah?
There's
Exceptional or
excellent.
excellent condition?
That's rare.
Right. And it really would be on a new asset where we put a brand new tot lot in. And again, it really, at the survey point, we really looked at what's been replaced. And I don't believe we took into consideration anything planned. It was what was in place at that particular time.
So when we're talking about, so for example, like JSK got a new tot lot, are we just saying that specific feature of the park is now exceptional, or are we saying that the entire park has now become
It's just
like in
that
good
specific.
condition?
So if there were other poor ratings throughout the park, maybe it's a bus stop, maybe it's the roadway or the sidewalks or tree, whatever the category was, just that one specific amenity received the exceptional, or what was exceptional? Excellence
So it doesn't
score.
apply to the whole park? I think that's his question.
Right.
Will it still be considered a highest needs park?
Each park was assessed based on the number of facilities and the conditions of each of the facilities as identified in the assessments that are outlined in the original Parks Master Plan, and then, as WRT mentioned, part of the training for this new current assessment, it took into consideration all of the amenities within the park, including other various, streets, bus stops, and those type of amenities, and evaluated the actual condition of each of those, took into consideration overall all of those amenities within the park, and that was what established the overall park rating.
But can I clarify, so if you had a park with 5 poor features in it, would that park overall be considered poor until all 5 of those features were upgraded, or as you upgraded each one, it would change the rating of that park?
WRT can correct me if I'm wrong, but it took into consideration, so 5 amenities, and then essentially ranked the average of all of the amenity scores, whether it was poor, fair, good, or excellent, and that's the outcome of the overall park score. So it does take into consideration, and there's an evaluation in the assessment that WRT has on taken into.
I think the fear of some of the commissioners that if there's piecemeal approaches to the park to bring a certain amenity up to par, that park will be considered in excellent condition, but the park is not in excellent condition. So I think that's what Commissioner Singh is asking. Would that park be considered excellent condition overall, or just that amenity?
Likely no. I don't think
we
there were
had
any parks in excellent condition.
Right. I think you'd see an exceptional on a brand new park. Let's say Trolley Park, for instance. You'd probably see exceptional there, but I think that'd be the exception. Anything else beyond that, as Jen and Sarah mentioned, would all be part of the assessment. But I don't think one amenity would change from a poor to, right. I don't think you'd see that complete 180 shift.
And I also want to just make a note that equity factor A is just one piece of all of the census tracts for that location. So it could, although it may not be just based on the condition, park condition, it considers all of the other equity factors as well.
Thank you. You answered all my questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I noticed that the conditions of parks, as has been commented, has been a very high priority that has emerged as a problem in the surveys. And also I noticed poverty continues to be at the top, and there was a third one, and safety, public safety in the parks. It's almost like the same problems continue to stay there. And I hope that the policymakers of our wonderful city government will look at those conditions and see if we can have an impact on them, especially when we're investing millions of dollars in improving parks. At some point, the perception of the public has to change slowly. I also wanted to make, that's a comment, so it's not a question. I also wanted to make an observation that I don't think I heard the presenters point out what are the benefits of this assessment. And I think they should know that 50% of the funds for parks that are being allocated are targeted to the areas that are identified as a high concentration, high needs neighborhood. I thought it's important the public understand that. It's not just an exercise that we do and spend a lot of money doing them, and it's a real benefit for the communities because it makes us closer to the real world of what's happening in our neighborhoods, and we even question the results. I also noticed in one of your surveys, you had very high percentage of responses for English speakers, but you had 0 for Hmong population, 0 for Punjabi, and 2% for Spanish-speaking folks. I hope that in the next round, we kind of play around with that to see how we can improve those numbers, because we are very interested, when I say we, Latinos, but folks in our community from different backgrounds, we all care, but it's the methodology you use to reach those folks that I think you and when I say you, I mean staff and our consultants should look at it a little bit closer to hopefully improve the feedback that we get from residents. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair Ward, do you have any questions? Commissioner Collier, you have any questions?
I was just going to ask, what is WRT?
Well, it's Wallace Robert Todd. It's our consultant.
Oh, okay, got it.
Commissioner Kucharski.
Chair, can I jump in really quick just to address a comment from Commissioner Braza? The demographic representation that you mentioned, those were surveys that were taken in that particular language, not that we didn't get results from those different ethnic groups. Sarah, if you can maybe go through the demographic representation and how it compares to the census data and how we did reach those target audiences.
Yes, I'm going to pull up the slide again.
And after that, you have the floor.
Although we didn't receive the surveys in that particular language, overall our demographic representation for race and ethnicity was pretty well covered. And we'll show it here. Here you can see the race and ethnicity and the census percentages. So they were all pretty well covered. The Asian or Asian American was a little low. Hispanic, Latino was a little under, but it was the biggest portion of the census. So we got fairly close. Middle Eastern, we were also a little under on the white race, but overall we had pretty good coverage, taking into consideration the race and ethnicity question.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll also just say on the subcommittee side that that's what I was referring to. As this process went on, WRT and the city was very responsive to the idea of like, we are not getting the representation that we want, and how do we work to get that? And I think it really improved the overall results towards the end because of that very factor.
Thank you.
My question, I guess, is for the parks staff. I don't know who exactly, but when it comes to having a highest needs list being larger or smaller, how does that affect how you allocate the resources? Is it where if you have more in the list, then you can be more flexible and put things in more places? Or is it, if I had less, I could really make a greater impact on this smaller list of parks, or neither?
Commissioner Kucharski, I think that's a good question. It's a great question. A little bit of both, you know. The last definition had approximately 20 facilities in there. And, once you start that process of design of kind of what we're going through the West Fresno, right, with the community centers, you start getting to a point where I want to say other parks kind of get left behind that don't fall within the highest needs. So expanding that definition does give us that flexibility to extend that reach to other parts of the community. As you can see, there's a number of parks that fall within kind of those categories of the 25, 33. And quite honestly, there's a shock that some aren't in some of these 25% or 10% or 33%. But yeah, I think it does give us that flexibility to kind of expand that reach with highest needs dollars. But then at the same time, it does allow us immediately to concentrate on some of those parks that historically have not received investment. I think that's what we're doing right now with this first phase at the 33% that we're working through. Hopefully that answers your question.
Commissioner Dolan? Commissioner Soto? So Aaron, my question is, currently we do have, you said about 20 parks that's in the highest need definition right now that we have in place. And if we expand it, we'll make a recommendation to expand it to the 50, which already includes the 20 parks, even though it's totally up to City Council to accept our recommendations or do their own thing. How would that affect the 20 parks that are in the highest needs definition now that are currently being allocated funding for improvements?
So you're talking about after the adoption of the new definition?
Yes.
They would then kind of fall within whatever definition comes up, right? Let's just say 25. So that definition goes from 20 to almost doubles to 51 parks at that point. So then those original 20 then would have that, what I'll say, competition or not with the other 31 parks that come into play. So now that pool grows from 20 to 51, so additional 31 are now kind of in that definition of highest needs neighborhood. The one thing though is the definition that was adopted back in 2021, the dollars that were allocated in those 3 fiscal years stay in that definition, which those projects, the old original, stay in that funding. So that funding can't come into the new definition. But again, I think what goes on, anything that's been started with the current definition, I think is kind of where you're asking. Anything that's started now, what happens to it? I think from our standpoint, we'd love to see projects finished. It's tough to have pretty designs on a shelf, right? So I think our goal would be to try to finish what we've started with this current definition.
Yeah, that's my fear, that the work that's being done on the 20 parks that are currently under the highest need definition will just stay there because we have adopted a new definition and those parks won't be completed or upgraded. So any suggestions on how we can not have that happen? Do we have to select the 50% and hope that City Council takes our recommendation, or we just sit back with our fingers crossed and hope?
Yeah, I really think, you all being tied to the community and knowing what your constituency groups want and need, I think you all being the advocacy behind that group and really letting us through the comment period, as we go through this and getting them out to vote. I believe that data, those surveys, and that input really will help kind of guide that direction.
I just asked that, when we're in that phase of getting community input on the maps and what definitions, and I know they're going to be at community centers where a lot of residents and youth and seniors frequent, that we have staff to be able to explain the definition and explain currently that we do have 20 parks. They're under the old definition, but when we adopt this definition, just explain it a little bit more, because we get it, but we have to go into detail when we're talking to the public, because we're using jargon that we understand, but we have to break it down and use simple language when we're talking to the public, because we hear this all the time.
Agreed. And I think, our commitment is to continue during this process, during this survey period, is to continue to get the word out that, your input is needed. As I mentioned, the 4 West Fresno community centers that we'll have a booth out there for those, again, to try to get as much input as possible. In addition to that, our community centers, our team does a great job of going around and giving our staff the information to talk to our patrons that do come in, whether it's the teens, the youth, believe it or not, and definitely the families as they come through for family events. So making sure they're equipped to answer questions, and if they aren't, where do they turn to? How do they get a hold of us, and how can we get the information to get the right data maps and so forth, and explain that to them, because I understand it is confusing.
Thank you.
Sorry, can I
Go
make
ahead.
a comment? So just to piggyback off what Chair McCoy said, as far as the outreach and connecting with the community, I want to commend the Parks Department for an excellent job and all of the feedback that they got. I'm a little confused still. I know we discussed it at the highest needs meeting that we had about the breakdown of the responses, right? So, Sarah, you mentioned that the 4.8% came from tabling, but you mentioned that was from tablets that you had provided for community. And then the paper was 3.29 and online was 91%. I'm concerned that this is not representative of all of the hard work that, you all did in getting that outreach. I collected paper surveys at a couple community events. I tabled as well for a couple of events. And so I'm still confused as far as the online, like how much of that was from email, how much of that was from the QR codes that we had at the community events. My concern is that based on these numbers, we may look at this and see like, okay, tabling and like in-person things based on the paper is not effective. I don't think that's the case. So in this next phase where we are asking community for input, I do think it's important to have those in-person conversations and to be at those events. So, Sarah and I had some great conversations with community members and explaining to them what these things mean. Those are not questions or things that can be addressed through an email or, online, which, again, not to take away from, all of the responses that we got that way, but I'm still concerned that, like I said, this is not reflective of all the work that was done, and I don't want it to be a misrepresentation of, that importance of that outreach and community engagement and like in-person engagement. So if there's a way for us to maybe track that a little bit better, I think it would be helpful.
Yeah, thank you for the feedback. After having that conversation, we did realize that we do need to come up with another way that we could still break it down a little bit further than just online, because there were printed materials that were given out at events, and people could have potentially scanned the QR code at home and taken it online, and it wasn't considered for the event, it was considered for online. So we are working through other methods of tracking or fine-tuning that a little bit down. So phase 2 will hopefully have better breakdown, and as we get older in this, we will have more breakdown.
All right, do we have any other questions from the commissioner before we move on to the next workshop? All right, we're going to move on to the next workshop, ID number 24-1324, workshop to review of Measure P fiscal year 2025, adopted budget and fiscal year 26 budget build schedule. Would someone from the Parks Department please begin the presentation?
Good afternoon, Chair McCoy and members of the Commission. I'm Ed Chenevere, Assistant Director for the Parks Department. I am joined with me today by Tu Zhang, our business manager. We're very pleased to have him in that position, and you'll be seeing a lot more from him as we move through, believe it or not, the FY26 budget process. Right. Coming up. So today I'm here. I'll try to move as quickly as I can, but I know there are some people who are new to some of this information. We're going to talk about the FY25 Measure P budget as it was adopted. review the FY25 recommendations that were made by this commission, and then we'll talk about that FY26 budget timeline as well. And if you could please if you have any questions, please hold them to the end, and we'll get to them at that point. So first, we'll jump into the adopted budget. So this slide, I know we reviewed several times over the course of the FY25 budget adoption. So I'll really quickly review how this is formatted. But this really is the entire Measure P budget for FY25 on one sheet of paper. Across the top, the columns are organized so that you can see which department. So of course, the green columns are funds that are budgeted at the Parks Department, yellow for Public Works, blue for Public Utilities, red for the Capital Projects Department. And then on the far right column, you can see a total summation of Measure P citywide. Now down the left side of the column, you'll see first all of the revenue that's coming in from Measure P. So you can see that we have a beginning balance that was projected to be about $41.2 million. So that's carryover from FY24 into FY25, some of which is for FY23 through $25. A little bit of that is still actually FY22 money, particularly in the Category 2, which we'll talk about. Next row is taxes, so that's your actual Measure P revenue. So you can see that in FY25, we anticipate Measure P to generate $46.5 million in revenue. And then other revenue is primarily interest. Nearly 100% of that is the projected interest to be generated from the fund balances. After that, you'll see the appropriations. So that's the actual expenditures, and that's broken down by which department is administering that portion of the expenditure. So it gets a little bit complex because you'll see that there's some expenditures that are administered by, say, the police department or the Public Works Department, but the budget is actually housed in the Parks Department. And so the reason it's really presented in this matrixed format is so that you can, if you see something there, you can cross-reference that directly with the city's published budget. So you should be able to find the budget in that department section. So of course we have operating department, the Parks Department, Public Works Department, Public Utilities Department through Beautify Fresno, Park Ranger program through the Police Department. We have the Finance Department that helps us out with audit and controls. And of course, the Arts and Culture administered by the Fresno Arts Council. I'll go over a little bit of these in a little more detail on the subsequent slides. Before I do, I just want to highlight across the top, you'll see the categories. So category 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Some of those are repeated because they may be allocated in more than one department's budget. And then directly below that category, you'll see a number, the 2701, 2711. Those are actually fund control numbers. So a new thing for FY25, we've allocated the individual sub-buckets. So not only is Measure P Category 1 allocated in accordance with the definition, but 2701 is there to identify funds that are specifically citywide in nature, whereas 2711 can only be used. So when we pay a transaction, we'll only pay it if that's on a high needs park. So we added a level of control in the system this year. Next slide here, we've highlighted the Category 1 areas of Measure P. Category 1, of course, is allocated to operate and maintain existing parks and park facilities. That's budgeted primarily in the Parks Department, though there is a little bit you'll see over there in the Capital Projects Department. That's for the project delivery salaries associated with the, say, staff time that can't be directly attributable to a specific project that the project managers who are assigned to the Parks Department projects, when they have like sick leave, for example, or staff development, they'll have some time that shows up in that category. The Parks Department, of course, our budget includes money that's administered by Public Works and the Park Ranger program through our Police Department, and as well as a very substantial allocation of capital improvements, the largest portion of that for highest needs parks. Category 2 is for the development, acquisition and development of new parks and park facilities. Category 2 is nearly 100%, same as Category 1, budgeted inside of the Parks Department. A little bit for operating, that's for the staff that support the capital program, finance roles, things like that for new park and park facility development. The rest of that is allocated for the acquisition and development of new parks, of course, with a little bit over in our capital projects department as well. Category 3 is for youth programs, senior programs, job readiness programs to benefit youth and veterans as well. And this particular sub-fund, as we call it, is a little unique from the other ones because it is projecting to begin the year with a slightly negative balance based on FY23 and FY24 having slightly aggressive projections for revenue. So the fund balance is forecast to completely break even by end of FY24. Category 4, of course, is for arts and culture programs. On that one, you'll see the beginning balance is estimated. It's projected to be about $5.65 million. We think it's going to be a little bit more. Finance is currently finalizing that breakdown now, just based on some very favorable interest rates. And that amount, of course, is the amount that's in the bank today, and that will be passed through very soon here to the Fresno Arts Council to administer next year's round of grant funding. 5.576 million then, and 127,000 of interest is what's projected to be collected in FY25, which would then be made available for grants in FY26. Category 5 is the bucket that's allocated for 3 different key components, projects that are consistent with the San Joaquin River Parkway Master Plan, beautification, street beautification, as well as safe walking and bike trails. Category 5 is almost entirely allocated into, it's administered by the Department of Public Works. All of the other buckets or the categories are programmed. The revenue comes into the Parks Department. This one, the revenue actually goes into the Public Works Department. And we do have Director Mosier here to speak to the commissioner recommendations a little later in this presentation. There's a little bit of that one as well in the Parks Department for our Melbourne Overlook project. So with that then, I do have a few slides here on the recommendations that the commission made last year going into FY25. I'm going to read you the dates because they're a little scary because they're coming up quick. So FY25 Commissioner Recommendation number 2, they're going to jump around a little bit because I have this separated so that the parks slides are first, and then I'll have Director Mosier speak to the Public Works recommendations. Now I do have one minor correction that I will give to the clerk to post online. I have the text for motion number 2 and number 5 flipped. So motion number 2, which was made on November 6th, 2023, was $2 million for nonprofits and other community organizations who provide after-school recreation and community services and workforce development programming through our park system so they may apply for Measure P grant support. So the FY25 adopted budget includes some funding for new programs, namely $66,000 for new programming in youth cricket and futsal from Measure P Category 3. However, the entire balance of Category 3, as you saw from this slide showing the Category 3 fund balance and operating allocation, is allocated to operate existing city programs. The City Council did not make any additional motions pertinent to that recommendation. Motion number 3 was for $50,000 for translating Measure P information into other languages. The FY25 budget does include $46,300 for marketing and outreach, of which $20,400 is specifically designated for translation and interpretation services supporting operational programming. And also there is significant additional funding on each individual capital project for outreach. And each capital project has a translation into a minimum of 4 additional languages for those languages. Motion number 5 was made on November 20th, 2023. And apologize again for flipping that text, but this one modified motion number 2 to $3 million for nonprofits and other community organizations to establish the Dr. Francine Apuda Fund to provide after-school recreation and community services and workforce development programming through our park system so they may apply for Measure P grant support, with City Council recommendation that guidelines be provided by this commission for City Council consideration and adoption. Again, that goes back to Category 3. There was a small allocation for new programming, but it was primarily allocated to sustain existing operations, and the City Council did not make any additional motions pertinent to that recommendation. Motion number 7 was to allocate $300,000 to the Frank H. Ball Park for improvements in the restrooms. This one, City Council did not make any motions pertinent to the recommendation. However, the Parks Department was able to utilize available FY24 funds to repaint the restrooms, repair partitions, and to install 3 new concrete picnic tables. Motion number 8 was made on May 20th, and this one also reiterated the November 20th and the November 6th motions to allocate $3 million to establish the Dr. Francine Apuda Fund for grants to nonprofit organizations. Motion number 9, made on May 29th, 2024, was a modification to motion number 1, which allocated $75,000 for the Arts Council to use in implementation and technical support to carry out arts programming. To carry out the arts program, allowing it to be used for a broader range of implementation and technical needs. The City Council did make a motion to provide the Arts Council with $200,000 for purposes of auxiliary services, tech assistance, translator services, marketing and outreach, material to be printed in multiple languages. However, that motion was not adopted with the budget. The following 5 motions, I'll just read these, but for all 5 of these ones, the City Council did not make any motions pertinent to the recommendation. Number 10 was for a sum not to exceed $30,000 to fund the engineering and construction of a 20 by 20 shade installation over the table human gathering area of the Puppy Love Small Dog Park at Roding Park. Motion number 11 was for a shovel-ready project at Storyland to restore outdated restrooms in need of ADA upgrades, requesting a sum not to exceed $400,000 to the upgrade of the restrooms. Motion number 12 was for an allocation of $300,000 for interior renovations of both restroom buildings at JSK Park. Number 13 was an allocation of $200,000 for Alradka Park for the design to start the process of lighting for soccer fields, and $850,000 for Mosqueda, which includes irrigation repair, design, and turf rehabilitation. And number 14 was $25,000 for a feasibility study regarding whether the basin behind JSK Park could be used for an expansion to that park. With that, I will ask our Director of Public Works, Scott Mosier, to come up to the podium and share the motions that were made for the funding that Public Works administers.
All right. Good evening, Madam Chair and Commissioners. Scott Mosier, Public Works Department. All right, and I'll briefly cover the 3 motions that were pertinent to Public Works. Item number 1 was a motion to include $350,000 to begin assessment and development of long-term implementation strategies that positively impact land, air, and water conservation. Although the City Council did not include any additional dollars related to this, we did want to note that the adopted fiscal year 25 budget includes $392,300, so actually higher than that of general fund resources for the sustainability division of the Public Works Department. So that division includes 3 authorized positions. The mission includes all aspects of sustainability, including energy conservation, energy efficiency, transition to clean renewable power, And as noted here, intent clean our air, create new jobs, and save taxpayer dollars. That mission also includes they're moving into areas of looking to go to recycled water at our various facilities, whether that be median islands, tree irrigation, and of course working in partnership with utilities and with the Parks Department on each facility. Motion number 4 was a motion to include $200,000 to establish a new urban forester position. So the City Council did not take action to include that position. However, the FY25 adopted budget included 5 full-time equivalent positions for the tree program for management of the urban forest. I want to be clear, our landscape division does include 2 arborists on staff, so that would not have been a new thing. We have 2 arborists on staff, and in addition, $2.8 million of general fund resources for the preventative geo-based tree trimming program. And that puts us approximately on an 11-year tree trimming cycle throughout the city. So flipping that around, about 9% of our street trees citywide are trimmed and maintained through that program each year. Of course, we'd love to improve that, but that's an 11-year trim cycle. So that's in addition then to the management structure of a public works manager over the entire landscape division, partial time from a park supervisor 2, in addition to support from an assistant director and myself as the department head overseeing that. So although we don't strictly have an urban forester job classification, again, we'd submit to the commission that we do have those needs addressed. And lastly, then there was a motion related to a section of the Cesar Chavez Boulevard median island between Maple Avenue and Chestnut Avenue, and I am pleased to report that was one of the 4 major street beautification projects funded around the city. $400,000 of Measure P Bucket 5 for beautification was included, and this segment is one of those 4. The other 3, just to note for the commission, another one in southeast Fresno, Belmont Avenue between Clovis and Fowler Avenue will also be receiving trees and irrigation. Barstow Avenue, Angus to Cedar in the Fresno State area, and then a section of Herndon Avenue in the Pinedale area between Ingram and Blackstone were all funded. All right, and thank you. I'll turn it back over to Ed Chenevier.
Scott, can I ask a quick question?
Absolutely.
The 11-year trim cycle, where does that come from?
That basically comes from our previous trim cycle. The prior 2 years had been a 10-year trim cycle, and simply due to the increased cost of the tree trimming on the contract when it was extended, the council opted to fund the same dollar amount, but due to inflation, we wound up slipping back to an 11-year cycle.
Is there any existing best practices or guidelines on what the trim cycle would be ideally?
Absolutely. The Urban Forest Management Plan recommends a 7-year trim cycle. So we are short on that, but we'll continue looking at that year by year to work towards achieving that goal.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, when does the work of those projects that you just reported on, when do they start working on that?
All right. So the major street beautification projects, so those are scheduled between winter and early spring this year. So and as those dates are finalized, then we'll be glad to report back on that.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I have a question. Sorry. Hi. So I just want to get clarification for motion number 4, because the handout says proposed budget, but you said that was adopted, correct? The 5 FTEs?
Yes, that
Okay.
was adopted.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I'll turn it over to our Assistant Parks Director.
All right, now I'll wrap up with the fun part, which is what's coming up, which is the fiscal year 2026 budget. Believe it or not, here already. So in our next meeting, October 14th, very similar to last year's cycle, we will bring you workshop presentations that span the entire range of Measure P. So at the next one, we'd like to bring you a presentation on our capital projects, all of the projects that are underway, their current statuses, and any new ones that were added with the FY25 budget or any new funding that was added as well. After that, on October 28th, our after-school recreation community services presentation. I know last year we had a lot of fun with all of our program managers reviewing after-school, senior programs, youth sports, etc. November 4th, we'll have the Landscape Trails Beautification and San Joaquin River Parkway presentation. And on November 18th would be the FY26 hearing and budget motions. I will note after each one of those, we'd like to recommend that you also take that opportunity to make any motions that you have that are fresh in your mind from the presentation you received that day or from the previous day, but that would essentially give you 4 opportunities to make recommendations before we build our department budget, which takes us to this next slide. So after we receive your recommendations, in November, then in December, that's when we will really begin the FY26 budget process by estimating our current, sorry, did I say 25? I meant 26. We'll estimate FY25, how much more money we need for each one of our individual programs or projects. That will give us an estimate of how much money will carry over to the fiscal year 26 budget and informs the starting line essentially for the fiscal year 26 process. In January and February, that's when the Parks Department and all of our partner departments will prepare our budget recommendations for the mayor. That's what we call budget build. We'll have all of our program managers provide recommendations and insights around their specific areas of expertise. And then we'll build a budget to present to the mayor. That goes into the system in March. All the work that we do goes into our central budget management system. That includes recommendations for any reallocations to our base budget, capital projects budget, and any new recommendations that we're making to the mayor for funding. In May of 2025, that's when the mayor, have I got my dates wrong? No, we're good. May of 2025, that's when the mayor will present his proposed budget to the commission, to the city council. We will turn right around and bring that to you for a presentation. And that's when, in June, that opens that up for that second round of recommendations for this commission to make to the city council. We'll take those recommendations to city council for consideration during our budget hearings, which will happen later in June. And then, of course, the city council will adopt a balanced budget by the end of the month. And that concludes my presentation, and I'm available for any questions you may have.
Thank you. Does any member of the commission have any questions or comments regarding the item? I'm going to start with Vice Chair Ward. You have the floor.
Okay, great. Thank you. Mr. Chenevert, I have watched the budget hearings for the last 2 years, and I appreciate that this presentation did bring back to the commission the updates on how our budget recommendations fared, which was really bad, really bad. And I would say what has really stood out to me over the period of time that I've watched this commission make recommendations multiple times through the cycle and then seeing them presented at the budget hearing is that there's a massive disconnect between what the commissioners are thinking or what the commissioners thinking might be realistic to propose and then what actually gets presented and then how it fares in front of the city council. And I was maybe hoping before we engage in that process again. That there could be maybe some facilitated conversations around what is more realistic and maybe how we can take a collaborative approach. The one that really stands out to me has been that this commission has expressed an interest repeatedly in having a grant process available outside of the arts and culture space. And so the ordinance at section 7-1508, subsection C, does clearly authorize, that the funds made available pursuant to this ordinance can be set aside by the city for competitive grant solicitations for local education agencies, public agencies, nonprofit organizations to develop and implement projects and programs. And that's not the arts and culture section. So it's something we can do, but the numbers that this commission has been recommending basically represent almost the entire bucket of category 3, which is where it would come from. And obviously, Director Gary and the Parks Department have a lot of things planned for senior and youth programming and activities and ideas on how that category 3 funding can be used. So I was just wondering if maybe it might be possible before we engage in making our recommendations around that, and maybe specifically if we could find out what would be realistic and what the Parks Department might help the commission advocate for in that respect, that we would be able to do that before we get through this next budget recommendation process. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, that really is, sorry, my ear starts to echo sometimes. The workshops that we have coming up, Capital After School, that we added those last year for that specific reason. And so we certainly we will take it under advisement about how we can possibly get you better information about what the constraints are so that you can make motions with the best possibility of success.
I almost want to say the way that they're presented is like the commission suggested this, and here's how our department thinks we're meeting that need, but it is different, and maybe there's something we can do to get more on the same page.
Understood. Thank you.
Commissioner Colliga, do you have any questions?
No. Thank you for your work.
Thank you. Commissioner Kurcharski, do you have any questions?
Not at this time.
Commissioner Dolan?
Just want to thank you and Scott Mosier for your presentation. It was very well done. Thank you.
Commissioner Soto?
Yes, thank you for your presentation. I do have a question with regard to the carryover forecast. So this is my first time kind of going through this whole process. What is that carryover forecast based on?
Yeah, so it's based on our estimated expenditures, right? So when we adopt our budget, of course, it's adopted with the assumption that we will spend the whole amount in the current fiscal year. That doesn't always happen, right? So we might have vacancies, for example, in our after-school programs or senior programs. Those are going to accumulate some savings that would then roll over into the next fiscal year. Also, of course, the budget is based on estimates. So if utility costs rise, or if we have a center that's unexpectedly offline, and so we have some savings from staff savings or utility savings, all of those things kind of accumulate. So the mid-year budget process, which will begin in December, that's when we re-estimate every single operating section and every single capital project, so that we have a better estimate about where we're actually going to end up the year, so that if we do have any salary savings or savings of that nature, we can make sure to scoop it up and make it available for new programs or projects in the next fiscal year.
Thank you. And as a follow-up, I think that's where I was trying to get clarity on, if we're not spending all of the money, why aren't we spending all of it? Like, if there is vacancies, why are there vacancies? Do we not have the support for, people to go through like recruitment or onboard? Like, what is it that's impeding us from utilizing the funds as, they're approved? And my other question, sorry, my mind just kind of went blank there for a second. Are we not, So then, is it safe to assume that we are not required, as Chair McCoy mentioned in her question, if we're approving projects and those funds are being allocated, how do we ensure that those projects are being completed and that those funds are going to the projects that they were intended to go to, and the areas and parks that they were originally intended to go through? And sorry, I remembered what my question was. As the gentleman who commented online, is there a place where not just the commission, but community can track, where those funds are ultimately ending up? Because if we're approving something, on paper, or when people look it up, it looks like these funds went there. But then what I'm hearing is there's a possibility that they might not go to that particular project. So is there a place where folks can track exactly where those funds are being allocated and where they end up?
Yeah, I'll take those one at a time. First, spending. I'll say we're getting much better at spending money, right? So fiscal year 22, when Measure P first went into effect, of course, we had, I think it was 46 or 47 people on staff. Of course, we've staffed up significantly since then. There's a learning curve as we bring people on board. And there's also turnover, just natural turnover in the staff. And as the staff has matured, we've seen just our average staffing level slowly increase. So we are getting much better all the time at spending money. Too good sometimes, right? So projects, you asked, our projects, how do you make sure that the money that gets allocated to projects stays on that project? So projects, when we put money on a project, that money will stay on that project, and it will roll over in that project until the scope of that original project is fulfilled, or until and if the city council makes a reallocation, either through a fiscal year budget adoption or through an act of an amendment to the appropriations resolution. And then finally, can the community track? Yes, we have, of course, our Measure P annual report, which is coming up. I know our team is working on that. We also have an annual financial report that gets posted to the city's website. We're working on closing out last year's financial report right now. And there's an accounting for how much is spent on each individual operating section and capital project in that report. There was another one I had on my thought that I was thinking of too, but and the mayor's approved budget, right? So the adopted budget will be posted on the city's website at fresno.gov under the budget section, and that has a pretty detailed accounting of each individual project and programmatic area and how the funds are allocated to those.
Thank you. And just to clarify, what I was asking about is I guess, my question is, we're allocating it, but are we actually spending it? Do you know what I mean? Like, where do we track actual spending and what the money is going to? Because as was stated, if with the carryover, it could continue onto a project, but it could be reallocated to another area at the council's discretion. So is that something that will be evident in the budgets that you're mentioning here? Okay.
Yeah, any reallocation would be posted with the adopted budget in the narrative. And then, of course, the final outcome, all the dollars will be accounted for in the annual financial report at the project level.
Thank you.
Commissioner Soto, you can always send in a request to have an update on any projects that are being worked on. If you have any questions or want to know what's being done or what's being allocated, what's been spent, you can always send in a request to have that item put on the agenda. Commissioner Miller?
I just want to thank you for the presentation. Lots of information, and to echo Commissioner Ward's comments, I'd really appreciate any help from staff members on how we can craft recommendations so that they get heard. It can be pretty frustrating with all the hours the commission puts in to feel like like our suggestions are not valued. So any help with that would be appreciated.
Thank you. Commissioner Singh?
Thank you for the presentation. Just want to echo what my fellow commissioners have said. Any guidance on how we can, make sure our recommendations are heard and even approved would be better. That would be great. Thank you.
Commissioner Barraza?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to, first of all, I'm glad that I was getting ready to remind you that we had asked you to tell us what happens to our recommendations. But I was very happy to see that you made a presentation. Thank you so much. That's very important. I wanted to ask for something. They call them the unhoused population or homeless or whatever the proper term is. I'm familiar in Southeast Fresno with a park called Pillabus Park. You heard a gentleman that made a presentation about concerns about how that area, despite the fact that a substantial improvement was made to the green grass, and it looks beautiful. I see a lot of young kids, children, playing in that field. That's also very good because in the past, residents were afraid to go to the park. They still are afraid, but at least they show up and play soccer on it. I kind of wanted to actually make a motion to ask the council that for the next fiscal year that there be an appropriation of $900,000 to do 3 pilot projects of the houseless, or I'm sorry, I can't remember that correct term, but the homeless population. I would like to monitor the improvement. I'd like to see what creative ideas our Parks Department, in partnership with the Fresno PD. Now we have park rangers. We could even seek folks to adopt the park, nonprofits. Let's do something creative. Let's start with that one, but there may be other commissioners that may have 2 other parks that they would like to add in their districts. I'm familiar with that one, but Madam Chair, can I make a motion?
I'm sorry, we're not taking.
Oh, this is a workshop.
This is a workshop, yes.
Okay. No wonder our city attorney was getting ready to jump in. But I will be making a motion at the appropriate time. But I just wanted to ask you to start thinking about what can parks do to address that problem. I know that the governor now is making it easier to do projects. So I just wanted to drop that's a priority, that if we don't address public safety in the parks, the families are going to be more hesitant to use those facilities. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions? Well, thank you for that presentation.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
You as well. All right, we're going to move on to ID number 24-1317, workshop overview of the expanded access to arts and culture grant program process. Will someone from the Parks Department please begin the presentation?
Hi, good evening, commissioners. Jennifer Solis, Division Manager in the city, or in the Parks Department. We've had a lot of recent comments and questions from the PRAC regarding the Cultural Arts Grant Program and the various milestones. So since PRAC plays a very important role in this process, we put together a presentation tonight to provide an overview of the service agreement with the Fresno Arts Council, as well as the roles and responsibilities of Measure P, Expanded Access to Arts and Culture Expenditure category. Additionally, we did provide the commissioners with a binder of the presentation and a copy of the service agreement with the Fresno Arts Council. In that agreement, we also tabbed the section where the appendix or exhibit has the ordinance as well. So that may be helpful in the future, as these are ongoing processes each year. So it might be helpful for you to have on hand. There we go. So tonight we will review the Measure P ordinance as it relates specifically to the expanded access to arts and culture expenditure plan category. You may hear me reference this as expenditure category 4 throughout this presentation. We will provide an overview of the deliverables as listed in the service agreement with the Fresno Arts Council. Although there is not a slide directly related to service or to the administrative process and timelines, I do want to note as we go through this process or the presentation tonight, any items related to a PRAC recommendation or a council approval, we'll have to go through a process to add an item to an agenda to either PRAC or the city council. And just note that the lead times for those can vary between 15 to 30 days prior to the meeting date. So just keep that in mind. And that's dependent on, if items do require a legal review, that may extend the timeline there. And as always, we can open up the floor for questions at the end of the presentation. Okay, so as I mentioned, the focus of tonight's presentation will be related directly to the expanded access to arts and culture expenditure plan category, which provides 12% of Measure P funds are dedicated to that category. And implementing the expenditure category 4 involves several responsible parties, including the City Council, the Parks Department staff, the PRAC, which again I may refer interchangeably with the Commission because that's how the ordinance references the Commission, you all here tonight, and also the Fresno Arts Council. So PRAC subcommittees do come into play for specific deliverables within the administrative service agreement, which we will get into in a couple slides. So again, 12% as it relates to expenditure category 4, 12% of Measure P funds shall be made available on an annual basis to invest in competitive grants for nonprofit organizations that support and expand access to arts and cultural programming. So grants shall also be implemented by the Commission in partnership with the Fresno Arts Council using multiple solicitations that allow for a diverse set of programs with different program sizes and reach, including core operating and project support grants. And the Commission shall ensure that the grant applications are reviewed in a transparent and competitive process. And these may sound familiar as you recently awarded the first year of projects, and that did include core operating and project support grants. So Section C is specifically related to the Cultural Arts Plan that was adopted last year and states that the Commission shall work in partnership with the Fresno Arts Council and local arts and cultural stakeholders to develop the Cultural Arts Plan. This plan shall be updated every 5 years by the Commission. And the remaining two categories, so Section D reiterates that the funding for operating support shall support organizational stability for arts and cultural organizations that reflect the cultural, geographic, and demographic diversity of the city of Fresno, and that the proportion of each grantee's overall operations serve residents within or visitors to the city of Fresno's sphere of influence. Also, Category E, grant funds shall prioritize organizations and programs that support and expand diverse public or youth engagement and equity. Moving into the service agreement with the Fresno Arts Council, this is just a slide of a timeline of events to get us to where we are today. On May 25th, the City Council passed a resolution for the Fresno Arts Council to administer the city's cultural arts grants program. And on August 10th, the City Council adopted the Cultural Arts Plan, and the City Council also approved a 5-year administrative service agreement with the Fresno Arts Council to administer the grant funds. This slide outlines the deliverables that are outlined within the service agreement and the responsible parties. And I'll go a little bit more into detail on each individual deliverable in the next few slides, but this is a good representation of showing the responsible parties for each deliverable. And the Fresno Arts Council is the service provider. And like I said, I may use Fresno Arts Council and service provider interchangeably throughout this presentation. But as the service provider, the Fresno Arts Council has the majority of the responsibilities. And they will be outlined in blue or highlighted in blue throughout the next couple slides. And throughout the presentation, you'll see all of the same colors outlined for each party in this table. The PRAC is outlined in orange and has a number of responsibilities throughout the agreement. A PRAC subcommittee comes into play at deliverable 5 and 6, and the City Council is highlighted in green, and their role is to adopt grant guidelines or any amendments to grant guidelines. And park staff is responsible for reporting and accountability as outlined, and will show up in purple. Deliverable 1 outlines essentially the grant guideline development and revision process. So the service provider, in partnership with PRAC, shall develop written grant guidelines to make grant awards consistent with the adopted cultural arts plan, seek community engagement, and incorporate that community feedback into the grant guidelines, as well as develop a list of acknowledgement requirements that show that the projects and programs were funded by Measure P. And just to know, year 1 of the guidelines were adopted by Council December 7th of 2023, and I'll try and relate where we are in the current process as we're in the middle of year 1 and year 2. Just to kind of help reference where we are in the process. The service agreement does also outline additional information to be included in the guidelines. For example, providing information necessary to ensure a transparent process, reporting requirements, and evaluation methods. Additionally, the grant guidelines shall be reviewed by PRAC in partnership with the Fresno Arts Council at a minimum every 5 years. And that's to ensure the compliance with the grant program overall. However, PRAC may review and amend the guidelines no more than once a year. And any amendments to those guidelines will need to be recommended by the PRAC and adopted by the City Council. This is the current deliverable, actually, on where we kind of stand with on year 2, and you'll hear from the Fresno Arts Council later tonight regarding that item. Deliverable 2 outlines the grant guideline approval process. So as I just mentioned, the PRAC will make a recommendation on any amended guidelines, and city staff or park staff will present that to the council on behalf of the PRAC and Fresno Arts Council for City Council adoption, excuse me. Deliverable 3 outlines the notice of funding opportunity announcements, and that should say grant solicitation. The word solicitation was dropped off for some reason. Sorry for that error, but the agreement does state that solicitations shall be in accordance with Measure P expenditure category 4. We just went over that a couple slides ago, and at minimum grant solicitations shall occur at least once a year. So the PRAC, also in partnership with the Fresno Arts Council or the service provider, shall use multiple solicitations with different program sizes reach, including the core operating and project support grants, which you saw in year 1 as well, and through the projects that you just awarded recently. The service provider shall also ensure that the grant solicitations are provided in English, Hmong, Punjabi, and Spanish, and other languages as requested, as well as provided in an accessible format. And just to kind of remind you, the year 1 notice of funding opportunity did go out December 31st, and the deadline was originally March 25th and got extended to April 1st.
I believe there's actually a correction on that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, maybe someone from the Arts Council would like to let you know so it can be reflected.
Okay, yes, we definitely can make that change. And apologize if I have any missed dates. Deliverable 4 states that the service provider shall provide technical assistance and support to all of the applicants at no cost and ensure equitable access to the available funds. And deliverable 5 outlines the collection, review, and recommendations for award of the grant funds. The grant applications, they are required to be submitted to the Fresno Arts Council, and the Fresno Arts Council shall convene a scoring committee to include the Cultural Arts Subcommittee to review, score, and prepare recommendations for grant awards to the PRAC. And this is when a subcommittee would come into play. It is the PRAC's responsibility to ensure the grant applications are reviewed in a transparent and competitive process, and the service provider shall ensure that grantees being recommended for awards are verified nonprofit organizations with a 501c3 in good standing with state and federal entities prior to entering into a grant agreement. Deliverable 6 is the acceptance of the recommended grant awards. The service provider and the PRAC, Cultural Arts Subcommittee, shall present the recommended grantees, award amounts, project titles, and a summary of the project location, scope, scheduled, and anticipated impact to PRAC for review and acceptance. Once those have been accepted by the PRAC, that would allow the service provider to have authority to make awards under the grant program on behalf of the city. And the service provider shall maintain a list of those applicants and their requested projects. And then year 1 of the projects were accepted by PRAC on July 17th, and then the appeals with the additional recommendations were accepted by PRAC on August 19th. So deliverable 7 does outline the grant agreement process that would be between the Fresno Arts Council and the awarded applicants. Each agreement must include project details, reporting requirements, evaluation metrics, and the others listed in this section. This deliverable also does outline a process for the approval of projects or programs within the city of Fresno right away. And we're currently in that phase for year 1. Deliverable 8 does outline the service provider's responsibilities as it relates to project delivery of the awarded projects and programs, and the service provider shall manage grantee oversight and monitoring to ensure grants are delivered according to the grant agreements, provide a limited scope of technical assistance to all of the grantees throughout the agreement, and ensure that any unspent funds are reappropriated to the grant program. Deliverable 9 does outline the payment processing and fiscal oversight responsibilities of the service provider. And the service provider shall manage all of the grant payment processes and record management and make any records available to the city of Fresno upon request. Lastly, deliverable 10 does outline the reporting and accountability process. The service provider is to provide a minimum of quarterly progress updates to the PRAC on deliverables 1 through 8 that we just went over in October, January, April, and August for the previous quarter, and an annual report. Annual reporting would be due September 30th for the preceding fiscal year. But that's a quick overview. That's really all we have tonight, just as it outlines the agreement that you all have in front of you as well. Happy to take any questions.
There we go. Thank you for that presentation. I will go ahead and open up the floor to the commissioners. Commissioner Barraza, do you have any questions regarding this presentation?
I do. The actual date when this commission took action to amend or to finalize the guidelines, Well, what do your records show?
It's October 16th, 2023.
Okay, I have that, but thank you.
So therefore, I think that's a basic question that I'm going to need to have answered. It says here that it's 1 year from that date that we can again amend the guidelines. So therefore, I would say November, what did you say, 14, 15?
September.
October 16th. The PRAC recommendation was October 16th. The council adoption was December 7th.
So just to confirm, when does it become 12 months from there?
I'll defer to legal.
It would be from the time the council approved the guidelines, so you couldn't take them back to council for approval until December.
But when was the action of the council?
They approved the guidelines. They adopted them.
Yeah, was that in December?
Yes, December 7th. Yeah.
Wonderful. So therefore, by this November, we should be able to complete the recommendations to amend the guidelines and take them to the council. Is that correct?
Yes, so you can complete them, but we would not be able to take them back to get council approval until either December 7th or after December 7th. That would be the 1 year mark.
Does that make sense to the rest of the commission? Okay, thank you.
Chair, if you don't mind, that's council action, which I think in Jen's presentation, she talked about various timelines. So I think that might actually be a little earlier for this commission to start those discussions. I think as we've gotten through some of the timelines, the 10-day legal review, staff reports getting to council. So waiting till late November might be too late. Just throwing that out there based on some of the timelines I think Jen talked about.
But we could have a discussion. It's almost like a workshop, the way we've been doing today, prior to taking that final action of recommending a final draft to the council. Is that correct?
Yes, so by majority vote, the PRAC can open it up for review, and those discussions can occur. We just can't take them to get approved until after December 7th. Okay.
The other question that may be related to the next item, you tell me if it's not an appropriate question. The subcommittee on the arts and culture has various functions delineated under this agreement. Those are annual. They're happening all the time. We finish, then we continue. The only function associated with the arts subcommittee was the completion of the master plan for the arts and culture. That was done, but that wasn't the only function that happens to be under the of that subcommittee. It may be a better topic for the next item, and we can address that, but I, at the appropriate time, I'd like to ask questions about that.
Yeah, that will be discussed at the next one, or under the discussion items.
Madam Chair, if I could, just another quick question, and you tell me again where that proper place is. We are asking the Fresno Arts Council to expand or do, I don't want to say do a better job, because they worked very hard, and I have no problems with the wonderful work that they completed. But I think that in the adequacy of the resources they need to do outreach, I, as a commissioner, don't have a real clear understanding whether the funds that were allocated to the Arts Council are adequate for that expanded function. And I don't know whether either city manager's office or parks people, at some point I'd like you folks to address how much money is it being anticipated that will be allocated for the Arts Council for the next round, not just for the administrator, because the Measure P says that 2% of the pot is to go for administration. Mm-hmm. But what I don't know if does that include outreach, or those are questions that I don't know the answers to, if I'd like someone to address them.
2% of the agreement goes towards the administration, as you already know and mentioned. That does cover, I can give you an amount. Is that what you're looking for?
Help her out.
Yep, I don't have the exact amount in front of me, but the amount will be a little bit more than last year's on the basis of just the additional, the more favorable interest environment that we're in.
Thank you. That's good to know. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Thank you. Commissioner Singh.
No questions or comments from me.
Thank you. Commissioner Miller.
Nothing from me. Thank you for the report.
Vice Chair Ward. Couldn't hear you here. Can't hear you.
Nothing, thank you.
Can
Commissioner
I
Collier.
make one quick correction? If I can, the actual amount is less on the basis that last year's payment covered 2 years of revenue from Category 4. So this will be 1 year.
Commissioner Collier, you have the floor.
No, thank you for your time and effort.
Commissioner Korcharski.
No comment, thank you.
Commissioner Dolan.
I just want to commend you on the presentation. It's actually very helpful and a good overview of that whole process for us. Thank you.
Commissioner Soto.
Thank you for the information. Thank you for the binder. This is really helpful, and all of the information that you all provided to us. Just really quick, and I apologize if this is redundant, but I just wanted to get clarification. The guidelines can be revised or updated. Did I understand within the year or after 1 year?
So the way the language is written under the agreement is that it says by majority vote, PRAC may review and amend the grant guidelines no more than once a year. Grant guidelines may only, subsequent amendments must be adopted by the Fresno City Council. So you'll have it within once a year. So since they were approved in May, technically you can approve them now.
Go ahead, turn your mic on.
The guidelines weren't approved in May. The guidelines were approved by the PRAC October 16th of 2023. And then in November, they were presented to City Council, and then December 7th, City Council revisited them again and adopted the guidelines at that time. Yeah, nothing happened in May related to the guidelines.
Sorry, I misspoke. Yeah, so October is when you guys can start reviewing them again.
Good clarification.
So if you guys want to put that on the agenda, send an email and we can have a discussion about it. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to move on to the next workshop, ID number 24-1318. Review grant guidelines for the expanded access to arts and cultural grant program in partnership with PRAC. Would someone from the Fresno Arts Council please begin the presentation? Good evening, Dr. Chavez.
Good evening, and thank you for this opportunity. I actually just want to make a correction on the last presentation. Thank you, staff, for doing this, but it is the extension was only for panelists, for recruiting panelists, not an extension for the applications themselves. The other thing I would like to point out is the conversation related to subcommittees. The PRAC subcommittee, if you note, in the presentation, item deliverable 1, it says service provider in partnership with the PRAC will develop the written guidelines. Therefore, if you look at this chart, the PRAC should start up here because this is where the revision of the guidelines begin. So,
do you mean the Cultural Arts Subcommittee?
Yes, the Cultural Arts Subcommittee, because that is who informs the PRAC of what's going on. And in fact, when the subcommittee was in place, work was done, and we had the opportunity to consider recommendations that we had heard from all of you. We had the opportunity to consider recommendations that came from the community. So we've been working on this for a while. And in the presentation, can I go? Bernard? Okay, cool. All right. And in today's presentation, I'm only going to focus on an overview of information that will inform the guidelines. Now, you've received draft guidelines and you've received draft policies. Those are all for you to carefully review, consider, digest, chew, do whatever you will, but come back with a final product. So we're hoping that this is a gentle start that will allow us to arrive at a positive set of guidelines that all of you can agree to. In my presentation, we will be discussing the policy recommendations, equity, new steps in the application process, definitions, and regulations. I don't believe we will have time tonight to go through all of the guidelines as they've been drafted, but you can go through them, read them carefully, and using the information that we discussed tonight, consider how it all plays out, because this information will inform or has informed the development of those guidelines. The first issue I want to discuss is equity. In this process, you hear that word a lot. And yes, Webster has a definition that you all can look up. But in the current lexicon and the way that equity was included in in Measure P, it was intended, oops, where'd it go? Okay. You're playing tricks on me. So the way it was intended was to be something that would adjust. Now, in the image that you can see on this screen, there's a barrier, and that's the fence. If you think about grant making, typically there are barriers that keep some people from accessing the process or accessing the final reward, which is the grant. The fence is the barrier, and when you look at equality, which has been discussed from this dais, everyone gets the same piece. In this case, everyone gets a box. Whether they need it or not, everyone gets a box. When we talk about equity, it's not about everyone gets one or that we divide the pie in equal parts. Equity discusses if you don't need a box, you don't get a box. If you need a box, you get one. But some people need more than one box, and so they get two. This is the way we discuss equity, and equity was intended in Measure P. So I just want to start with that, because as we move forward, we keep stumbling over that word. And I want us all to have the same understanding of what that means. And perhaps you already knew, so excuse me if I'm telling you something you already knew. As we move forward with the development of the guidelines, we're going to need to make some changes. And so what we've done, and when I say we, it was the subcommittee when it existed and the Arts Council, was we looked at different issues that were impacting us in this first round. So we looked at equity practices, because putting a box is a practice. It's something we do. It's an action we take to remediate a problem or an issue. So equity practices moving forward, should this commission decide to adopt these, could be opportunities. So we have an emerging grant category so that small organizations can participate. In this category, we have a reduced number of application questions, so less questions to make it easier for people to apply. We also allow for the use of fiscal sponsors, because some small organizations haven't yet established themselves and they need the help of a fiscal sponsor. Emerging 501c3 organizations will be allowed to apply in both categories. And the categories I'm talking about are the same categories that we had last year, which are operating support and project-specific grants. This allows them the greatest opportunity to access these funds. Then another equity practice is outreach. And we've talked a lot about outreach. Now, it's true. We have a finite amount of resources. And I think, and thank you, Commissioner Barraza, for saying so, we did a good job. Could we do better? Oh, yes. But we don't have the resources to do much more than we did this time. There are resources available through Measure P to help us do this. We just have to get them. But outreach is an area that is important. We want to accept as a policy that all outreach will be done in 4 languages, and that we will have an opportunity for one-on-one technical assistance. And we are doing that currently. We have people, in fact, the technical assistance has already started. I just met with a lady this morning who wanted help on how to apply next year. So we've already begun that work. Data collection as an equity practice. We want to have a letter of intent. If we have a letter of intent in our application process, we can gather a lot of the data that the city is requiring us to collect. We know the benefits of data, but it also, a letter of intent goes beyond that. It also provides an opportunity for us to do some early screening. In this last round, I shared with you that many of the applicants did not have all of their state clearances. Their tax reporting was not current. They didn't have the Secretary of State or Attorney General clearances. All of those things can be identified in a letter of intent. We get that information up front, and if people aren't prepared, they can't apply. This time, we did it backwards. I'm not sorry we did it that way because, as I shared with you, there were many, many organizations that would not have been eligible if we would have just cut them off without giving them the opportunity to correct the problems that they had. And some of them still weren't able to do it this year, but they'll be ready next year. So a letter of intent allows us to do this early screening. And so that's part of the process that we'd like to implement. Narrative questions in all application forms will include identification of who's to be served and in what part of the city each applicant organization will be providing service. So we want to know that. Where are you going to provide your service? There was a huge concern that many of the applications were from Central Fresno. That shouldn't surprise anyone because Central Fresno is the cultural arts district. But just because someone has their office in Central Fresno doesn't mean that they don't serve the entire city. So in the letter of intent, we want to know what part of the city do you serve? Where is your event, if it's an event? Where are your services going to be provided? And I'm not going to go through each of these letter of intent issues individually. Oops. Let's see. Individually, because you can certainly read these on your own. But I do want to point out one, and that is something that we learned this year was that a lot of organizations that really didn't deliver art services were applying for these funds. And Commissioner Dolan, you asked me, how do you define arts and culture? There is a way to define it so that we're all clear and we all agree on what that is. If we require that each applicant use the NTEE codes, and there are 42 that are specific to arts and culture, then we know that these service providers provide service in arts and culture. That doesn't mean that everyone else is excluded. There is a category here where others will be excluded, and I'll get to that. Fiscal sponsorship is another huge issue that came before this commission. And folks wanted to know, well, how come just anybody can't be a fiscal sponsor? Well, there's very real reasons. If you're a 501c3, you developed articles of incorporation, you told the government that you would provide XYZ services. You didn't say that you were going to support art programs, maybe. If you didn't say that when you established as an organization, and now you choose to provide that service, you could lose your nonprofit status. So we are very specific in identifying a fiscal sponsor for nonprofit organizations that have experience in the field. They will be responsible for fiduciary oversight and fiscal management for these organizations. I don't take that lightly, nor should you. We're asking other organizations to be responsible for folks that are getting these funds. So this definition for fiscal sponsors has been developed so that we are consistent with what the need is as we've identified it in this specific process. Emerging organizations. Emerging organizations are organizations with budget sizes of 50,000 or less. So we're looking at small organizations, and that's consistent with what you did last year. But this time, by creating these definitions and making this very clear, we don't have folks that are emerging organizations applying in the established category. That happened last year, and we had to shuffle because those were mistakes that weren't made in the process. Established organizations are another group. Those are with 50,000 and above budget sizes. And established organizations are those organizations that have been doing good work in the community for a long time. We are proposing, however, that in this round, that established organizations choose between project-specific grants or general operating support. Last year, we allowed them to apply for both. This year, we're asking them to choose. Now, why do you think we might do that? And I'm going to answer that question because you don't. You're not allowed. But it's because it's the teacher in me that asks questions like that. We are doing that because this next year, we will have less money. We'll have less money and more applicants. We know we'll have more applicants because the word is out. We did a good job of outreach this year, but those people that earned grants this year are telling others. And it's word of mouth, which in Fresno is the best outreach if you're doing something good. Everybody knows about it, even when you're doing something not so good. But this is the change for established organizations. Now, established organizations applying with a fiscal sponsor are eligible for only one project-specific grant. Grant categories. We're not changing the grant categories. We want to keep them the same. There's general operating support, but to apply for general operating support, an organization must have an arts and culture NTEE. That's the trigger. General operating support was intended, and if you read Measure P, the ordinance, it very specifically says it's to support and sustain arts and cultural organizations. That's what GenOps does. It supports and sustains organizations. So we want to make sure that arts and cultural organizations are receiving that general operating support, but we want to be sure that they are, in fact, arts and culture organizations. Now, one might say, but other groups need general operating support, and they're offering afternoon art class, so they should be able to do this. Well, not really. If you think of an organization like EOC that might apply for a project-specific grant, of course, they would be eligible for a project-specific grant. But should they really be getting general operating support? They have other resources and other ways of accessing that support. This fund was intended for arts and cultural organizations. That's why we want to adopt this change in the process. Grant categories, general operating support, you can see that emerging projects which are designated at $50,000 and below can apply for project-specific grant. Established organizations can apply for project grants. But here's another one that I want to point out. In last year's process, we had many organizations that identified themselves as providing art therapy. Art therapy is a real thing. Art therapy requires a license. There are licensed art therapists. We should not be providing funding for projects that claim art therapy unless, in fact, they have licensed art therapists on staff. So we're suggesting that if someone is proposing art therapy, that they have licensed art therapists and therapist bios and license numbers be included in the application. That covers us all. We don't want people doing therapy that aren't licensed to do so. Now, the ordinance speaks to mental health and wellness. We still provide that benefit by having projects and supporting arts programs in the community, because art, by its very nature, is cathartic. Art is therapeutic. But when we define it as art therapy, that's something very different. And that's why we're making this proposal, that you adopt this as a policy. Regulations. We have an appeals process. The appeals process, we're not proposing a change. I want you to consider it again, because there were questions last time about, well, how come they weren't allowed to appeal? Or it has been brought up that everyone should be able to appeal. Well, if everyone was able to appeal, you can only imagine what that might look like. We'd be here for a long time reviewing all those appeals. So what qualifies for an appeal is very specific. If there was a clerical error, incorrect processing that caused the panel to score because of an error, that's grounds for appeal. But just because you didn't like your score, that should not be grounds for appeal. So we need to be very clear as the Arts Council and as the Commission, because ultimately the Commission is the one that will approve or deny an appeal. So we want to be clear that we all accept what is eligible for an appeal. Now, all activities funded with EAAC funds must take place in the city of Fresno, including rehearsals, performances, and presentations. That was not in the guidelines before, and we were told by several people that some folks are not they might have their office in the city of Fresno, but they're not having all of their services or their opportunities within the city of Fresno. So rehearsals, for example, are something that young people might have to access. Without transportation, how do they access it if it's not within the city of Fresno? All artists named in applications must provide a letter stating that they are available and willing to participate and that a fee has been agreed upon. This year, in applications, artists were identified as providing a service. Budgets included an artist fee. Artists came to the Arts Council and said, I just heard that my group is included in a proposal and that they got funding, but I looked at their budget and we can't do the work for that. And I said, well, did you talk to them before? And they said, they never told us how much they were going to put in. So by having that clear, that the artist has a letter included, we won't have that problem again. Funding distribution certainly will be contingent upon available funds and the number of applications, but the breakdown is proposed to be similar to what we did last year. This is a goal. This is not actual, because as you observed, there were more applications in different categories, and so it wasn't an exact split of 40-40, 10 and 10. But that is a goal, something that we should continue to strive for. General operating support grants will not exceed $50,000 for emerging organizations and $300,000 for established organizations. Now, we did receive a recommendation that proposed increasing that, but knowing that we'll have less money and more applicants, it seems like it would be prudent for one more year to keep that cap at 300 for established organizations and to drop the project specific for established organizations to 150. Allocations will be recommended by the Commission with the goal of prioritizing approximately 1/3 of awards to projects and organizations that are in or will take place in highest needs neighborhoods as defined by the city and the Commission. You just had that conversation. It's important, based on the outcomes of last year, that we clearly identify how it is that we're going to guide resources to those folks that don't have access and that are underserved. If we use your established process of highest needs neighborhoods, we can move towards getting close to addressing the highest needs for arts and culture as well. So that's something that we'd like to add to our process this year. And lastly, guidelines must adhere. So if it's not in any of the information that I just shared with you, if it's in the ordinance and it's in our agreement with the city of Fresno, it will be in the guidelines, because those are the documents that we have to follow in moving this process forward. And lastly, you do have all of the draft guidelines that have been informed with this information. I realize you don't have time to go through all of them tonight. And as I see your eyes, you're thinking, can we just go home now? So I do want you to be prepared, or maybe you are prepared today, to provide any input or any questions or suggestions based on what you have now. And then we can move forward so that next time when I return, we'll have the guidelines in place, and God willing, you'll adopt them. And then we can move forward to scheduling for approval with the city council. So if there are no questions, well, I will leave you to questions now.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Chavez, for that presentation. Does any member of the commission have any questions or comments regarding this item? Commissioner Soto?
Go ahead. Okay.
So I will go through this. Thank you very much for putting this together. One question that I have, just for, maybe you can just tell me, is there anything in the guidelines that specifically states that grant recipients cannot charge fees for the specific programming that they're being funded for, in regards to like accessibility and making these programs accessible? I'm just curious, is there specific verbiage regarding that?
First of all, that's it's a question that often comes up with grant funding. Organizations have to support themselves. Many of them charge admission fees. Many of them have ticketed items. In the guidelines, it does say that reduced prices should be made available for residents of the city of Fresno. But to deny organizations any ability to charge at all would be unrealistic. But reduced prices is a requirement. Anyone else?
Commissioner Dolan?
No, thank you for that very detailed presentation. It responded to a lot of the concerns that have come up. Obviously, it's well thought out. I look forward to going through it in some detail.
Commissioner Kurcharski?
Not at this time, thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Collier?
Lilia, I wanted to ask you, I read somewhere about the rural grant program, and we're not supposed to do anything outside the city of Fresno. How do you reconcile that? Unless it's parts of the city of Fresno that are rural, I don't know.
No. What you're referring to is the Rural Access Fund. That's a grant program that's also managed by the Fresno Arts Council. It does not use Measure P funds. It uses National Endowment for the Arts funds, and that's why we're able to fund projects in rural Fresno County. The Arts Council is a service provider for the entire county. So while we love being able to work with the city And this project, it's important for us to find ways to support our rural communities as well.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
Vice Chair Ward?
Okay, great. Let's see. So I noticed there are several references right now in the draft guidelines where it talks about under definitions and things for emerging that it can be collectives of artists, but it's my understanding that has to be through a fiscal sponsor, and so that would be to comply with the ordinance language around the money only going to nonprofits. So I think it would be really helpful if we can add that maybe in the next draft where it says the collectives will be applying through the fiscal sponsors, just so that there's not confusion, because that is something where we get individual artists or individual groups that are not formally associated in any way who would like to apply, but we have to comply with the ordinance language around how the money goes out. So I think that would be really helpful. And then I just wanted to kind of note for the benefit of the commissioners that, again, as Dr. Chavez was saying, prior to the dissolution of the Cultural Arts Subcommittee, this is something we had kind of worked through around the policies, and this new goal of prioritizing 1/3 of funding going to fund operations and projects and things that will be taking place in the highest needs neighborhoods was kind of our way we wanted to propose to the commission and kind of generate some thought around how we can get money into specific parts of the city. And especially, I mean, when we were discussing it, the way that it connected with me is that in the Cultural Arts Plan, it talks a lot about access as far as transportation barriers, and how that's something that a lot of people noted was kind of something inhibiting or affecting their ability to access the art and culture throughout the city. And so we wanted to make sure that we were making some efforts to push applicants a little bit into making their projects take place in places where the people who live there will be able to enjoy those things. So thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Miller?
Nothing at this time. Thank you so much for the presentation.
Commissioner Singh?
No questions or comments. Thank you for the presentation.
Commissioner Barraza?
Yes, Madam Chair. Excuse me. I like the suggestion or recommendation of going with the 1/3 concept. One thing I just want to alert you, you may want to look at it more carefully, is that even having that allocation methodology, you could have places like District 3 that receive 43%. We could all look good with that allocation because District 3 is probably a high area, is located in the highest need neighborhood. So would you please look at how do you spread the benefit? And there is a place in the rules here that talks about showing the allocation by zip codes, because you're going to have to report to us down the road how is the money being used. And I also want to point out that if we ask people to say that they serve the entire city of Fresno, I want to have ways of verifying that, because people are very creative, and folks will say just to get the funding, oh yeah, I've been doing that, even though we in our parts of the city may never have seen them. I just want you to be careful that you find a way to verify it. It's very good that you're doing that, because bottom line is, where's the money going? How do we, because there are some places that are very good. And there may be other tools, like if they give discount to the schools of Calawa, or if they give, what else do they do? Do they train people, students of color, or or did they use a methodology that they have a blind selection process? I mean, there are many creative ways, but I thank you so much for really working hard of finding ways of spreading equity. Did I say the right word? Yeah. And on this 1/3, it's a good start, but please find a way to spread the benefit, because our district doesn't have that problem. We just got 3%, and we're supposed to call that fair. Of course it wasn't fair. I still think that, but But I think it's a very good start, and I thank you very much for your effort. And I think I also want to thank Commissioner Ward, because she also has been very creative on a lot of good ideas. And I know that Commissioner Soto is also, a lot of people here, but I think it's a good start, and I'm very happy to see this dialogue to get ignited and to give us an opportunity to carefully review the guidelines. And for the next meeting, I'm sure all commissioners may have other ideas, or maybe we polished what you have submitted. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And just to your point, it doesn't sit well that Southeast Fresno got so few grants, and we are looking at how do we do outreach for communities that don't see themselves as eligible or qualified for these kinds of services. So we're really going to be targeting groups that may not, or artists that may not see that their work is worthy, because I experienced that in the past, that many times, particularly people of color, they do amazing, beautiful things, but they don't identify it as art. It's just what my mother used to do. And so they continue to practice that art form, but don't consider it worthy of grant funding. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we will now move on to discussion item ID number 24-1339, discussion regarding the Cultural Arts Subcommittee roles and responsibility as it pertains to the Cultural Art Grant Fund. I would like to begin the discussion regarding the Cultural Arts Subcommittee, its roles and responsibility as it pertains to the Cultural Art Grant Fund. This item was requested by some of the commission members to bring for discussion at this time. Does any member of the commission have any comments or questions regarding this item? And I will go ahead and start with Commissioner Barraza.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I was a little bit surprised when this item was removed. I don't know how it happened, the time that it was first removed from the agenda. And I've had a lot of government experience, so it's not like I'm a newcomer. And I didn't like the way it was handled, because in any previous organization that I've been associated with, you announce it, you inform people. Even if it's a legal step that has to be taken, please be transparent, open, candid. And I don't think, unfortunately, the way it was handled, I did not like it. I don't like to say unpleasant things when I serve on the commission, but I think we have to be open, and I think we can do a better job. The other thing also that happened when the previous recommendation was approved, some of the commissioners pointed out that we wanted to see changes in the process, in the guidelines. Therefore, there is one example of an ongoing task of the subcommittee that we thought that was still the remaining task. And then obviously we were told, oh, you know, their task has ceased, or their purpose has ceased to exist, therefore they're no longer around. Okay, well, at least tell us that it's not around. The point is that in the agreement that was signed between the Fresno Arts Council and the City of Fresno, there are very specific functions that are listed there. One of them is the role that they play in the screening of applications or reviewing applications as part of the screening committee. There's also there is also, well, you know, we know about the guidelines, and we already discussed that there are certain rules as to how that happens, but it's going to happen. But the allocation process is an ongoing process that is going to happen very soon. I hope I don't think it's a very efficient use of resources to be removing, creating, so that continues to be an ad hoc organization. That, in my opinion, I believe that should be an ongoing function, therefore a standing permanent subcommittee. I have not read any place in the rules that says that we don't have the authority to do that. And therefore, that's the reason why, along with Commissioner Soto, and I think Commissioner Ward also requested that we have a conversation. Why isn't it not possible that we have a standing committee? I'm very supportive of doing that. And the alternative is going to be that we'll have the discussion at the commission level. You know, when we have people dedicated to a subcommittee, they almost become experts on that subject. And we have it in different arenas, different areas. And that's really healthy, I believe. But I just wanted to point out that if it's an ongoing function, by definition, it becomes a standing committee. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. City Attorney, can you review what entails with us forming a standing committee, like how we will have to be responsible for the agenda, how we will have to find a place to meet, and who will pay for it?
Well, and that's essentially what this conversation is going to be about. So as a standing committee, it's the responsibility of the commission to publish the agenda, have interpreters, pay for whatever online fees are required, and then the question is where is that fund, where is that funding coming from? Where is the committee going to get the funds to be able to, keep this item on a regular agenda meeting? You're going to have a meeting place. It needs to be open to the public. So those are all things that's going to need to be considered when you're establishing a standing committee. So those are some of the things, in addition to also being in compliance with the Brown Act, having to meet in public. If there's 3 members, that means 2 members by itself is already considered a meeting, and so you cannot converse with anybody. If there's 3 members, 2 of the members cannot discuss anything, and you can't pass it along. So it really, you have to be very mindful of what you're doing when you're meeting. You wouldn't be able to send each other text messages, no group texting. Becomes very limited as to what you're able to do outside of a public venue. And you're still subject to the bylaws of PRAC. And so the only authority PRAC, you have would be what is given in the actual ordinance itself. So, if the guidelines are only adopted once a year, that's something that, you only need to do once a year. If the funds or the subcommittee is only required to assist with the, scoring, that only happens, once the funds are available. So those are all the things that need to be considered, is what exactly the specific rules are going to be as it relates to what's in the ordinance.
Thank you. Commissioner Singh?
I also support a ongoing committee. Just to keep it short, I think it'll allow us to be more comprehensive with our year-long kind of process of, our relationship with the Arts Council, even with outreach and stuff. I think that the subcommittee does have the ability to help Arts Council think through some more kind of creative ways we can, tap into folks that, might be missing from the table. But yeah, I also support an ongoing committee.
Thank you. Commissioner Miller?
I don't have any additional comments, thanks.
Vice Chair Ward?
I am supportive of a standing committee that's dedicated to the cultural arts topics of the PRAC. I appreciate the presentation that we heard earlier, the workshop around the roles and responsibilities of the PRAC and the Cultural Arts Subcommittee and the Arts Council, and how all these things fit together. For me, one of the things that I felt was, kind of really missing from that presentation is that, one of the most important things about a commission, and it's on the website for the city, is about kind of their vital operation and ensuring public involvement in these processes and things that are discussed. And also, within the ordinance itself, one of our primary authorities is receiving public input around the allocations related to the ordinance. And I just have to say, out of all of the meetings of the full commission, we do not receive a lot of feedback and public engagement around the allocations related to the cultural arts portion of the Measure P. However, I was appointed to help, shepherd the finalization of the cultural arts plan in June of 23 and served as the chair of the cultural arts subcommittee until it was dissolved last month. And I would say the amount of public engagement and public outreach that we have done as a subcommittee has been extraordinary. Probably hundreds of hours, spent speaking with members of the public who want to talk to us. I mean, parks are wonderful, but arts and culture really stir the soul, and they really generate a lot of public excitement and public engagement. And I think that if we're able to put together a standing committee to address this, it would provide a really wonderful outlet to have another opportunity to bring the public in on those discussions and see kind of, how things are being discussed and how they're being considered. I know, Angela, you did just mention we would have to consider having an interpreter. I've never seen an interpreter at these commission meetings, and I wasn't aware that the subcommittees needed an interpreter. I know there are other issues, to address. I don't think the Brown Act compliance considerations would be a concern. We'd be really happy to carry them out if we are able to establish a standing cultural arts subcommittee for this commission. Thank you.
Commissioner Colliga.
I brought up at the beginning of the meeting the issue of the subcommittee being terminated. I'd like to see an ongoing cultural arts subcommittee myself, but we need to think about what we're doing with this. What am I trying to say? You said that they would reconvene at another point, the standing committees.
Correct.
At what point would that be?
When it's time to review the grants and allocate the grant funding to the applicants.
All right, so that's an option, just something to consider.
Absolutely, ma'am. Commissioner Korcharski?
No comments, thank you.
Commissioner Dolan?
City Attorney, just to be clear, do those same Brown Act and other costs and restrictions apply to the temporary committees?
No.
And why is that, just out of curiosity?
As a ad hoc subcommittee, it's a 3-member body, and it's for a specific period of time, so they're tasked with a specific thing to do on behalf of the commission. Once that task has been met, then the committee automatically terminates. And so because it's kind of a specific project as defined in an ad hoc, it doesn't require the committee is not subject to the Brown Act versus a standing committee, which is now an ongoing, if they're going to continuously listen, have hearings and listen to do items, then they have to start, they're subject to the Brown Act under California law.
Gotcha. And Chair, I'm sorry, I should know this. Do we have any other standing committees?
No. Not even through none of the other commissions through the city of Fresno. Like the city council doesn't have any standing committees, planning commission doesn't have any standing committees. I asked that question.
Yeah.
So this will be the first one established if we do decide to do it.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Soto?
So with that in mind, I think I personally need to find out more about the benefits of having a standing committee. versus maybe just extending the time of the subcommittee. I definitely think that review is too late. There definitely needs to be some involvement before that. So if we could even make it, like extend it by some time, and keep it an ad hoc to avoid some of those added, restrictions and limitations. I think that might be also a consideration for us to think about.
I agree as well. My concern is, where is the funding going to come from to pay for a standing committee? Where are the meetings going to be located at? Who's going to be responsible for the minutes? Who's going to be responsible for the agenda? And also the Brown Act. But I do feel that it's necessary to have some type of continuance with the arts cultural plan through Measure P, because it's very brand new, and we just want to make sure that we kind of get it right. But then I do have those concerns as well, and I think my concerns are valid because there's not a pot of money to pay for a standing committee. So those are my concerns. 1 second. Yes, Commissioner Dolan.
Are there actual triggers written into the ordinance or legally that say when a subcommittee, an ad hoc subcommittee, needs to, what that period of time it can be in formation is?
So there's no set deadline. It's as delegated through a resolution. So if the commission wanted to establish the committee as an ad hoc for the purposes of working on these guidelines, as well as for the purpose of, when it comes to deliverable 5 and 6 for the next funding, that would be in the resolution. And so the specific, task would be to amend, review, assist, and then once the appeals of the process, once the funds have been awarded, then the committee would, or the ad hoc committee would dissolve. And then in a year, when the commission, if the commission wanted to review the guidelines again, at that point, you can reestablish the commission and you can kind of make it like an ongoing.
Thank you.
Okay. I have a question that is how we would be able to incorporate an ad hoc committee to do this, but it's my understanding that the Arts Council is considering doing the multiple solicitations of grants this year. So in year 1, we saw a combined application for operating grant support and project grant support, but it's my understanding that this year in year 2, there's going to be staggered. And so there's going to be, some quiet months, but then some months where we're looking at, we have to be involved in the review process, and also the recommendation of the allocations is made in partnership with the subcommittee to the PRAC. And that would be happening multiple times during the year. So is that something that can work under the ad hoc committee scenario, and what would that look like?
Madam Chair? May I?
Yes.
I think that the comment that was made just now, that when the guidelines are completed, the subcommittee ceases to exist, that is inaccurate. The subcommittee has other functions. It joins the screening committee with the Fresno Arts Council per that agreement. It also has a number of functions relating to the allocation of funds and making recommendations on the grants. So those are ongoing. If we want to have a process where we disband the subcommittee and then we create it and we disband it, that's not a very good way of doing business, but we could do it. But I believe that the functions are clearly ongoing, because in 5 years, every year, there's going to be all this work that the subcommittee is going to be doing. The other point I wanted to make is I believe that the work and expenses associated with the standing committee are eligible for reimbursement from Measure P. If someone could tell me something in writing there, just that I think it very clearly, because the business that this subcommittee would perform will be strictly related to what's authorized by the Measure P ordinance. So I respectfully disagree that this work would not be eligible for reimbursement?
So I did ask for a budget sample for a standing committee, but that was something that we did not receive tonight. So I was going to ask, is that possible for us to receive it during our next meeting so we can actually see what we're looking at? Because I do feel that this is something that's desired by most of the commissioners on the board that want to have this standing committee, but I think they need to see a breakdown of how much it's going to cost.
Excellent idea.
Go ahead.
Madam Chair?
1 second, Commissioner Singh, go ahead.
Oh, no, go
Okay.
ahead, Mr. Singh.
I just wanted to also make sure we got an answer to Vice Chair Ward's questions, because I think those were very pertinent to the topic.
I was going to say, we're all here as volunteers. Wouldn't this subcommittee be volunteers too?
Not a standing subcommittee. I asked that question as well during the agenda setting meeting.
We have to pay them?
It won't be we're all volunteers, but with the standing subcommittee, there's cost that entails with it because a room has to be reserved. There has to be an agenda that goes out. There has to be minutes that are taken, and that's something that will fall on the standing committee. It won't fall on the city or the Parks Department from my understanding, but I'm gonna pass it to Angela so she can correct it and give out the right information. But that's how I understood it.
Yeah, and that's correct. So you have the administration cost of, having a standing committee versus an ad hoc, because the ad hoc isn't held to the same standards as a standing. And so the members themselves aren't getting paid, but there are additional fees that are associated with the standing committee. And that question is who's going to be responsible for those additional fees and requirements? And then as to Vice Chair, I think we need to, I would probably need some more information as to how long that's going to be. Is it something that's going to be a little bit of a quicker turnaround like what it was this year? I mean, I would need some more additional information before I can answer that question.
So is it fair to say that can I make a motion to continue this discussion at the next meeting so it'll allow you time to prepare everything that we're asking?
Well, since it's a discussion, I mean, I think we can just end it and then we can always put it on for the next agenda if that's what you want to do.
Do I have to make a motion?
No, you can just ask if there's any more questions, and if no one else, then we can move on to the next item.
That sounds good.
That sounds good? Okay, so we will go ahead and end this discussion now and continue it at our next meeting. I'll make sure that I put it on the agenda. So we're going to move on to our hearing. ID number 24-1310, hearing to receive public input on allocations related to Measure P updates to the Parks Master Plan and Cultural Arts Plan and annual Parks Department budget and capital improvement plans. Would any member of the public like to make a comment regarding this item?
There is one hand raised. We have Gabriel Lozano.
Hi, Gabriel. You'll have 3 minutes.
Hi, sorry about, I thought I had to shove everything in 3 minutes and stuff like that, so I apologize for that. Thank you for hearing me. A lot of this stuff is just data collection. I would like to update some of the higher needs qualifications for the higher needs. And as far as the Parks Department budget, I would like to see how the money's allocated in the comparative statement through years, in stack bar charts, pie charts through years, and by census tract and by zip code, to see what we're doing. As far as the cultural arts plan, and I think that they said something about licensing for arts. That's actually a recreational therapist like they do in the hospital, where they do the different types of therapy, like occupational therapy and all that stuff. So I understand that. And one of the questions I had that they were doing the plan of, I thought the Measure P money was only for money that was in in Fresno, the city of Fresno. But then again, someone mentioned about Madera. I just don't think that that's right when I find parts in southern Fresno lacking in services or money or projects that we're talking about Madera. I think Madera should take care of their own thing, and that if they share the same project, then each municipality have their own way of processing the information or getting done what they want to do. And the cultural arts plan, it's a small community. So what I would like to see, again, data collection, that the people that the awardees of grants are, look, I've had grants and I've been part of a nonprofit where operational expenses was 10%. So I understand the trials and tribulations of doing that. But again, data collection, that we can't have someone in every district, every census tract and so forth, but that the clientele that they affect, we track that. And that's through data collection and so forth. And the outreach for the highest needs neighborhood, that we use other type of organizations like Fresno Unified. One of the unique things about Southeast Fresno, there's 3 school districts. So you may cover Fresno Unified, but you have 2 other school districts, Washington if you go far enough. And as all the other schools, you got Central and so forth. So I would like to see the higher needs asked, or what qualifies for higher needs changed or updated. And then I'm curious to see why Calendvital Screening 3.0 has been used when Calendvital 4.0 is in effect.
There are no more speakers online or in chambers.
Thank you. I will close public comment. Does any member of the commission have any questions or comments regarding this item? All right. We will adjourn the meeting. As always, I'd like to adjourn the meeting in the memory of Dr. Francine Apuda. The time is 8:53. Thank you for this meeting. Thank you for your patience. And go home and tuck the kiddos in the bed and enjoy your evening. Thank you.